welcome everyone online and those that decided to join in person. Appreciate it. Welcome to the Claymont City Board of Education special meeting and board workshop, February 3rd, 2022, 5 p.m. Roll call.
Mr. Cottrell,
Here.
Mrs. Grandison. Here. Mrs. Host,
Present.
Mr. Miles.
Here.
And Mrs. Wolf.
Here.
Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to flip our board discussion on ESSER funds to follow Cheryl on that. Ready?
I hope that I don't screw this up. I have coached appropriately, so. Thank you for having me. I'm Cheryl Ryan. I'm the Director of Board Management Services at the Ohio School Boards Association. And a couple of you I know and have worked with previously, but a couple new faces. So if it would be all right, if you would just introduce yourselves to me, and let's do name and how long you've been a board member or your role in the district. Whether you have children in the district is always helpful to me, or nieces, nephews, grandchildren, whatever it might be. And then something fun. Your least liked food. People always ask your favorite food. So I'm going to say, if there was something that you never had to eat ever again, you'd be happy. What would that be? And let's start with you, Aaron.
Aaron Cottrell. I was just appointed to the Claymont City School Board here in January.
Okay, you were appointed.
I was appointed.
All righty.
We had a member resign. I did serve from 2014 to 2017. So I did serve previously on the board.
So you didn't learn your lesson the first
So
time.
I did. That's what my dad asked. You know, why are you running back into a house on fire? No, I enjoy it. I'm super excited. I'm born and raised here in the community. I was a 1999 graduate of Claymont.
Alumni, good.
I had 3 older stepchildren that are all graduates here at Claymont. My wife was a graduate. My parents were graduates. So I'm invested.
Yep, roots run deep.
I have 2 children currently. Caroline, 10 years old, and building across the street in 4th grade. And then Cole, he's across the creek there at the elementary building. He's in 2nd grade, 8 years old. So just happy to want to serve again this great district here at Claymont.
Thank you.
Food, my lead. I'm an eater, so I'm not a picky eater. I keep my mouth shut when my wife does prepare us dinner. So I don't know. I mean, I'm a hunter. I like to hunt. So
Nothing you hate.
all wild game. I can't. I mean, I started thinking as soon as you asked the question.
Fair enough. We'll let you off the hook.
Hi, my name is Lois Grandison. I'm also a graduate of Claymont with his parents. My children all attended Claymont. I now have 3 foster boys attending Claymont. 2 are seniors and one's a 7th grader. I'm a business owner in the community and have been since 1986. I was appointed on the board last February when somebody moved out of the district, and then I was up for election here in November and won that election.
Congrats.
And I don't know, I love the community, obviously. I'm well vested in it, well vested in the school. And my least favorite food, but I don't eat it, so I don't eat no pasta, no noodle, no nothing. I don't eat noodles,
Interesting.
and that's everybody's favorite food.
I was going to
And
say
don't-
that might be a first when I've asked that question is the no noodles.
No pasta, no spaghetti, no chicken and noodles.
Okay, good enough. Kim.
Kim Beckley, I'm the treasurer here. I'm in my 4th year as treasurer. I started here in November of 2014 as an assistant treasurer. I am not from the community. Way. And my favorite food is deer steak.
Deer steak.
Other parts of deer, but not deer steak.
Okay.
I'm Brian Wrench, superintendent. Let's see, this is my 3rd year here at Claymont, or I'm into my 3rd year. Previously, I was at Frontier Local for 3 years. Let's see, I did not graduate from the community, but as far as my roots, as far as the community, my mother taught here for a very long time, probably around 35, 40 years, somewhere in that vicinity. So she taught in the district. Currently, I have a step grandson who attends preschool at the primary building, and my other son has a girlfriend who has 2 children, and they're planning on enrolling them next year into the district also.
Good.
Least favorite foods, I have several that I do, but I gave my mom props about, being vested in the community. But the one thing she kind of turned me against was cooked spinach.
Cooked spinach.
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's probably on a lot of lists. Steve.
Yeah, Steve Miles. Been on the school board now 3 years, newly elected board president, so learning that role with good help here, good support. Love the area, been here my whole life. Married a Claymont grad, 2 kids that graduated from Claymont. My son went on to Ohio Northern for pharmacy, and my daughter is at Walsh, soon to go to Mount Union for physical therapy. So we're proud to be here. I'm here to serve. Least favorite food would have to be crawfish.
Crawfish. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Wolf, and I'm newly elected this past November. My husband and I both were raised here, went to school here. I have 4 kids. Madison, she is a student now at Case Western studying physics. The next one is Mallory, and she's a pre-med student at Kent. And Marley's a junior at Claymont, and Miles is an 8th grader at Claymont.
Great.
My least favorite food, I like just about anything, but I'm gonna have to say lima beans.
Okay. Yeah, I can get that.
My name is Cindy Host, and I actually sat on the board with Aaron from 2014 to 2017 and was newly elected again in November. So this is my second
Go around.
go around in the rodeo. Yep. I am not from the community. In fact, I grew up a couple hours away from here, but my husband lived here, grew up here. We have 2 children. A daughter is a junior in college at Capital in Columbus, and our son's a senior. And my least favorite food is liver.
Liver. I get that a lot. I hear that a lot. That would not be on my favorite list.
No, it's not mine.
And as I said, I'm Cheryl Ryan. I've been at OSBA 15 years. I was a board member for 6, probably close to 7 years in Hilliard City, where I live. Came to Ohio from Colorado, where I grew up and where I met my husband, and moved here for a job at OSU. And that's where I was when I became a board member. Started working a lot as a board member would with OSBA and some different initiatives, and moved there when I got the first chance, and I have loved it ever since. So it's great to be here with you, and I love everything. I consider myself a foodie, and I would probably eat everything you've mentioned, maybe not the liver, but I cannot stand strawberries, which is a weird thing. I love blackberries and raspberries and gooseberries, but I don't know, there's just something must have happened in my childhood that set me off. So for me, it's strawberries. So with that, we're gonna get to work here, and I hope that you all will jump in. I know I'm going to talk about a couple things that have been conversation items here that maybe you have questions about, and I hope that you'll continue to ask those questions and we can have that discussion. But this is a fairly wide-ranging presentation that talks about a lot of issues that come up in terms of governance. And several of you are new or newly returned to the board. So I hope this is helpful. I think I was, just got close. Did somebody else do that or?
Yeah. That, I hit the next slide.
Oh, you hit next slide?
That's
Okay,
That's what came up.
okay. Because he told me to come up here and,
Well,
okay. So this slide, competence, collaboration, and commitment. You need to be competent to be a board member. It's not an easy thing. There's lots of stuff that gets thrown at you quite often and will continue to get thrown at you in terms of things to read, things to assess, things to monitor, things to evaluate. You need to collaborate. We'll talk several times in different ways tonight about the fact that your responsibility as a board member resides with the outcome of your conversations at this table. Your personal opinion, your personal passion, your personal knowledge, all of that is important as you work toward reaching a decision. But once a decision is made, that collaborative effort is what carries the day. And you need to stay committed because board work can be frustrating. You can have administrators, teachers, parents, other board members that some days jump on your last nerve. And sometimes you think, I'm sort of a volunteer here. For those of you that are new to the board, you're not going to get rich as a board member. So you basically are glorified volunteers, and that can be difficult. So we appreciate your commitment and hope that it continues to be so. If you're willing to do that for me, I will allow you. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about your roles and specifically how your role is different from that of an administrator and also of a parent, an alumni person, a community member. A little bit about how you organize and align your Board of Education, and you're going to make that work easy for me based on what I see behind you there on the wall. We'll talk a little bit about your meetings and communication. One of the most important things for you to agree on as a board is the expectation of how you will be informed, how you need to inform your colleagues, your administrators, and how they will inform you and what that expectation is. You want to make sure your community understands that you're behaving appropriately, that you're treating each other appropriately and professionally, that you're treating administrators and staff in the appropriate ways according to the chain of command. And that commitment of culture and trust related to your meetings, what happens at your meetings, and also during public participation and in executive session. So we'll talk about that. Okay, I always include this slide because it's good to give you a broad view of Ohio board members. There are 3,500 board members in Ohio, publicly elected board members or appointed by their public school boards. 65% are men. That number continues to go down almost every election. I think when I started at OSBA, we were at about 82%. Still overwhelmingly white board members, even in districts where we have students of color, we are largely white, very few under the age of 45. And I think my anecdotal opinion is those of you, there are several of you that still have children at home, but having children at home and probably also a job, even if that job is being home with the kids, doesn't leave a whole lot of room on the plate. And so I think oftentimes we have board members who are empty nesters or retired people. Very few send their children to private schools, but there are a few of those. I did a workshop just this week that has 2 board members who send their children to private school, and they ran for the board. I'm still not quite sure why, but I believe it's because they felt like they need to hold the district's feet to the fire in terms of what they perceive as the duty to taxpayers. And 50% are in their first term. We do get turnover with boards, and we hope that if you like your board work, that you will stick with it for a couple of terms. Your main rule, according to the Ohio Revised Code, is as policymakers. There are federal and state policies that you must have in your manual. If you are like Most districts, you have between 500 and 600 policies in your school board manual. My opinion and the state's opinion in terms of the revised code is that that is a governance job. Your job as governors is to take care of the policy in your district. So do you have a policy committee here in Claymont?
Mr. Cottrell and Mrs. Wolf.
And you consider that a board committee?
That would be a board committee, yes.
Good.
And we have some that are just administrative committees, but that one is specifically a board committee.
Perfect. I believe that's a best practice. Policy is a governance role. And so the fact that it's a board committee, I think is perfect. You've got 2 board members, superintendent, treasurer, that sit on that committee. And that's how it should be. That you've got 2 board members who are doing the homework of the board as committee members and bringing forward their recommendations for the 5 of you to approve policy, changes in policy. Every time a legislation changes, your policies will change. We got word just today that House Bill 51 is probably going to be signed by the governor sometime in the next week. And what that is going to allow boards to do is to once again have board members attend virtually if they want to, and if the board agrees to have them do that. Current law is that can't happen anymore. It got reversed after COVID was at its height. So there's an example of legislation that's going to cause all of you to go back to your policy manual and change. It is paired with administrative procedures, or what we call the reg or the guideline. And that is what makes it Claymont special. That is what tells your administrators and other people in your school buildings how Claymont does this policy. The state says we have to have these policies on bullying. The state says we have to have these policies on board staff relationships. But this is how it looks for us in Claymont. Hiring and evaluation, we'll talk a little bit about that. Your key responsibility as board members is to hire and evaluate, maintain, and guide your superintendent and your treasurer. Those are the only 2 staff members you are responsible for. And I have a slide that goes into a little bit more detail here. Your job is to be communicators. Your superintendent and treasurer, Kim, you said you don't live in the community, but and by law, superintendents and treasurers don't necessarily have to live in the community, but you as board members do. And so you talk to other parents and neighbors all the time, and your relationships with them and your ability to share with your administrators what you're hearing in the community is a valuable asset that you bring to the board, that advisorship. Next. Okay, so as we said, employing and evaluate a superintendent and treasurer, this is the revised code. So I always feel like sometimes it says too much about the things that we don't want it to and not enough about some of the stuff that it could. Approving the annual budget, that's an important aspect of your work. It's a legal document. I heartily endorse all of you asking frequent questions, having good conversation at your board meetings about your district's budget, not just the operating budget, but whether grants. I'm glad to hear that you're talking about ESSER funds this evening. It is your job to provide needed and safe facilities. You have really beautiful buildings here. Even your old buildings are beautiful. I haven't been inside this building, so I don't know what it's like inside, but from the street, it's beautiful. Your high school is beautiful. But you need to continue to provide necessary facilities and finances for your district so that you end every year in the black and hopefully with at least a few pennies in your savings account as well. So transparency, public records and the Sunshine Law. There are currently several districts in Ohio that are in hot water with public records and the Sunshine Law. When the Open Meetings Act was first established, there was just all kinds of hullabaloo about it. And in the last 5 or 6 years, we had far less conversation about this. Either boards were doing things right, or communities weren't holding boards up to the magnifying glass that they are now, but they are now. And so we have several districts that have done things not according to the letter of the law. and now they're in trouble. So this is an area where individual board members can get in trouble. The board itself can get in trouble. It can cost your district money, and it certainly can cost your district and your board credibility and embarrassment. So we want to make sure that all your questions about that are answered and you're doing everything exactly right. We'll talk a little bit about your communications. As I said, I think that's important, and particularly in an emergency. The chain of command and a little bit about your meetings. Okay, so this is the little part of my presentation that's about being on a soapbox, and I'm glad that all of you are on that soapbox with me. I also think that this is a governance thing. Your vision, mission, core beliefs, those 4 goals, the portrait of a graduate gets folded in under that strategic plan, but I'm thrilled to see that you have these and that they are so visibly portrayed. So what I wanted to ask you, next slide, is how you use them. So this is relatively recent, isn't it? Or is it not?
Year and a half.
Year and a half. And did you use a broad group of people to do this work?
We had we surveyed, staff. We had I'd also gone out and spoken to some communities, civic organizations, particularly with the portrait of a graduate.
Mm-hmm.
And once we had those surveys back, then we sat down and took a look at what we wanted to accomplish. Our district leadership team, we took a look at what we felt that, as far as core beliefs could be and what we wanted a mission and vision, and then we presented that then to the board. And then some of them got a little bit tweaked, but not too far from what they were. Like the pathway to success. Is that every kid has a pathway after graduation, and we just need to make sure that pathway is as clear as possible for that child upon graduation to meet a portrait of a graduate. And when we were looking at Leader in Me, so this is our 2nd year of being a district of Leader in Me, flows right into our portrait.
Sure.
Of a graduate.
Well, this is awesome. So I believe that making decisions as a board that are aligned with your vision, mission, and goals on a weekly basis, daily basis, monthly basis is governance work. The strategic plan belongs to the district, it belongs to the board. So the fact that I was looking before the meeting, your vision talks about a pathway for each student. I think your vision is very well aligned to your 4 goals. The mission, it talks about community and your core beliefs. It's really terrific. And active engagement by the board around your vision, mission, and core beliefs is something that I want to talk about. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about how you use your vision and mission in meetings. So you opened with the pledge and roll call. I would endorse and request that you at least have a conversation about reading your vision and mission, having your board president read your vision and mission either right before or right after your pledge. It kind of centers the board and tells everybody in your audience, whether they're at home or here in the room, what you're all about. It's great if all of you are very familiar with these 4 goals, so that as you have conversations tonight, you're going to have conversations about your ESSER grant and your options to spend that money. And whatever options you explore, if you can say, well, our key goals, one of our key goals certainly has to do with academic achievement of our students. We also have an equity goal that says we hope that we can provide whatever every child needs for him or her to have a satisfying experience in school and to be successful. And this grant funds, the decisions we make tonight around these grant funds are going to help us do that. As you talk to people in the community, when a parent complains to you, because I'm sure some of you are already familiar with that people generally don't come up to the board and tell you you're doing a fabulous job. But they do come up to you quite often with complaints. And if you can phrase your response so that it talks about They complain about the coaches, and you can say, well, extracurricular pride is one of our key goals. So I appreciate your sharing that with me, and certainly we're going to direct that to the superintendent or wherever those comments need to go. So living your strategic plan once a year, putting an agenda item on your board meeting so that the board can just talk about this. What's the same? What's different? What's changed? What do we love about our vision and mission? Asking your superintendent and treasurer or other administrators how they're using it in the buildings. Your responsibility as a board is to establish performance objectives and goals for your treasurer and your superintendent. And I hope that when that conversation happens, you talk about how those performance objectives are tied to the 4 goals, so that when it comes time to you to do that annual evaluation, it makes a lot of sense to you. I will tell you too that I don't believe I've ever worked with a district that uses an active strategic plan, including having the goals for every employee in the district, the superintendent ensuring that every principal and every employee in the district, down to cafeteria workers, bus drivers, instructional aides, et cetera, that all of their performance objectives, they know how they are tied to one of these 4 goals. Culture improves and student achievement improves and morale is raised because everybody believes very strongly. They know it's in paper and it's in writing that they are supporting the district's strategic plan. So thrilled me to see that when I came in, and I wanted to share that with you. So now I can jump off my soapbox and move on. So here is a little bit about your roles. When it comes to instruction and curriculum, the board sets the vision, as you have done. You've set your vision and your goals. You will adopt changes in programs, a new AP class. Let's just say you are a district that undergoes some sort of realignment at some point in terms of your grade levels. You have conversations about expanding pre-K or changes to your kindergarten. Those are the kinds of things that oftentimes administrative committees work on. Your superintendent has groups of teachers that get together and talk about something, and they bring it forward to the board and you approve those recommendations. Let's also say that as a board, you look at your state report card data and something gets flagged to you. There's a red flag. Your superintendent and all of you agree that middle school math seems to be stagnated. Middle school students don't seem to be improving as a district in middle school math scores as much as you would like them to. And you've noticed that over the last 3 or 4 years, those numbers have kind of just stayed the same. And so you as a board say, what can we do as a district to move us off the mark in terms of middle school math? We would really like to understand what the district thinks we could do. And your superintendent goes back and maybe meets with a middle school principal and forms a committee. And eventually that committee comes forward to the board and says, we've talked about middle school math, and here's some things we think we can do to maybe push us in an upward projection. And the board would approve that. So the superintendent assigns staff to meet the needs that the board has envisioned and recommends action items to the board for your action. Next, please. So when it comes to personnel, the board is responsible for superintendent and treasurer. I think it's a great agenda item, again, on your board meeting once every couple of years to talk about how do we hire people here in Claymont? What are the platforms we use with software? What are the different ways we try and recruit staff to the district? How are postings posted? How do we know that things are clear and transparent and equitable? How is the board reassured that if family are employed in the district, they're employed fairly? And if there's an opening in the district for a teacher that it's broadly seen, what are the practices and processes? I think that's a great board conversation. Having board members understand how the superintendent ends up with these recommendations for hire. You do receive an act on personnel. No person by law in Ohio can be recommended for hire in the district other than through the superintendent, but the board does act on his recommendations. And hopefully, as you are evaluating your superintendent annually, you are asking good questions about how he is evaluating his principals, his coaches, his athletic director, his second grade teacher. When board members call me on the phone and say that they would like to have a heavier hand in hiring the next basketball coach, I usually start a conversation about that process and how it is that they in their district can feel good about the superintendent doing that work that the law says he should do to bring a recommendation forward. Are there any questions about the way you handle personnel here? Does that make sense to all of you? Okay. Next one. Budget and finance. Treasurer Kim here is your CFO. She probably knows more about your district's budget than anybody else in the district. Budgets are really, really complicated. And I know many, many board members who have been board members a long, long time that still sort of, do this when it comes to school finance. The finance formula in the state has improved over the last couple of years. I think that organizations like OSBA and BASA, the Superintendent's Association and the Treasurers Association have done some great advocacy on behalf of public schools. We still have a long way to go, but the school finance formula is really complicated. But I do think it's a board member's obligation to try and understand the basics and understand a little bit about how your districts are financed. I think it's another fine conversation. At your board meetings, you have a treasurer's report all of the time, but for Kim to maybe take a few minutes sometime and talk about how you use title funds. For Kim, maybe a board member says, you know what, I'd really like to know more about how we allocate funds to our principals, our different principals. What's the system we use to determine a budget for our particular school buildings? Or what's the system we use to determine our athletics budget and how that works? I think those kinds of conversations for the community by the board are really, really helpful. You also are responsible for approving your annual audit after that happens in your district and reviewing and approving all contracts. You have a policy in your district that says for anything that we're spending money on over X amount requires board approval, and you'll talk about those things at your board meetings. And that number is different for every district. In some districts, it's $500. In some districts, it's $5,000. So it just depends on you. Any questions about your responsibilities for budget or finance? Okay, I have a question for Kim. Do you monitor booster budgets, or are they totally separate? Totally separate. How about, is there a foundation, an educational foundation? Totally separate. That's good. I think that's all best practice. Thank you. Okay, and collective bargaining. Who negotiates for Claymont when it's your turn at the negotiating table, when it's that time? Who are the people that do the negotiating?
I can speak for the last two contracts we had. I've been here. It's been myself, Kim, and the school attorney for both the Oakley contract and for the CEA contract.
Okay.
Prior to that, Kim can talk maybe a little bit since she's got a little more experience.
It was, Mr. Foley was the previous superintendent. I worked with him. Just him and Mr. Beckley, which was the board president at that time.
Okay. I would say probably 90% of the districts that I know of now are doing it just like you're doing it. Superintendent, treasurer, legal counsel. The board establishes the parameters. So as you head into negotiations, you'll probably have conversations as a board with your administrators on what that sandbox looks like for your agreements. How long are your agreements good for now?
The CEA expires at the end of next school year, so that would be 2023. And then the OPSI this is their first year, so they have 2 more years.
Okay, so they're not in sync time-wise. So the board is responsible for approving that contract. The board is responsible for, again, identifying the parameters for things like salary, benefits, understanding what the negotiations key issues might be, what your 2 bargaining units might bring to you in terms of their wish list. Have the last negotiations, are your day-to-day relationships with your bargaining units friendly, professional, collaborative?
Yes.
Good. That's great. You want to do obviously whatever you can as a board to support your administrators as they keep those relationships for you. And as you get close to bargaining, I have a slide about a scenario about bargaining. But the superintendent is the support role for you and is a liaison between his staff and teachers and the board during those negotiations.
And well, because the last negotiations, I know that, well, we had Mr. Miles and Mrs. Grandison, but we had updates through the whole process. And we actually, our attorney even prepared binders and came and went over where we were with negotiations. And so they were well adversed to what was going on. And as far as, gave insight of what areas we could go and which we wouldn't go. So they did have some kind of thought process. So they kind of guided me through that.
Perfect.
too.
Sounds perfect. Great. All right, next. Okay, so do any of you have family members who are employed by the district? 1, 2, 3. As teachers? Teachers?
Yep.
And you?
Student aid.
Student aid. Okay. So there are things you want to pay close attention to because you have family members, and in a lot of districts, we do have board members who have family members who are employed by the district, and it largely presents 0 issues, but it can present some issues. So in terms of the collective bargaining agreement, these are the 3 rules that you have to follow. If you have a family member who is on the negotiating team, if your family member is an officer of the union, or if you as a board member are covered by the health insurance of your family member, you must recuse yourself by law from collective bargaining agreement conversations. Does that apply to any of you? Those 3 things. So do you get health insurance from your wife?
I do.
And do you also from your spouse? So the 2 of you need to recuse yourself from discussions and a vote on the next collective bargaining agreement if your status remains the same. When it comes to other decisions about the fact that you have family members who are negotiated, it's sometimes a little bit less black and white. We would advocate that you recuse yourself from discussions about your own family members' employment. The Ohio Ethics Commission defines family in terms of conflict of interest as basically your immediate family, spouse, partner, son, daughter. I think maybe it extends to grandchildren. I'm not sure, but it doesn't extend to aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, cousin, etc. I do think, though, that there is a strong perception problem at times in districts with board members who are family members. So you just want to think about that. So when it comes time for your spouse to be reemployed, or maybe your spouse is going to be employed by the district on a supplemental contract as an extracurricular volunteer or something like that, you just want to be aware of the perception. And if it's not an imposition to you, it's probably best to recuse yourself from the conversations and the votes. Any questions about that or any discussion?
I have questions.
Okay.
So Steve's is with a different union. So
Right.
For the teachers union, then he would.
He's all good.
It's all good. So then I was just looking at, so we have 3 a 3 vote at all.
Yeah, isn't it
times.
nice that you do have a quorum?
Yeah, because I know when I was on the board the last time, my understanding was the first two. Number 3, I've never heard
Yeah,
as a board member.
yeah. Number 3 goes to your fiduciary benefit as a board member. It's against the law for a board member to benefit in any monetary way
Right.
from the district or a contract. And because you get health insurance from the fact that your husband is employed by the district, that means you're benefiting financially.
No, it makes sense. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, the last time I was on the board, that never came up in conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, the first 2 did. Obviously, it was always, I can't financially benefit. But I think the way it was explained to me is because none of the top 2 came into play. It was negotiated, approved by the union, approved, it was settled, that when it came to the board, it already had been discussed and vetted through. So that's just news to me, that's all.
New to you. Yeah.
Mhm.
So by all means, you're always free to vet this through your legal counsel, but I'm pretty sure they'll tell you that if you get your health insurance through your spouse's employment here in the district, you need to recuse yourself from voting on the collective bargaining agreement.
Last spring with the OPSI, I know you abstained from the contract. So I don't think there's anybody else that had to abstain. Mrs. Sproul.
Michelle Sproul.
Yeah, so they had 2 abstains, we still had 3.
Right. So as long as you have a quorum, you're good. And so in some towns, it actually does kind of come up during board election season. Superintendents want to know whether or not they're going to have a problem with a quorum. And it can happen. So 90% of the time you can still participate in conversations, and you should absolutely conversations and voting. So it doesn't matter. Most board members that I know, their family members are not number 1 and number 2, which is a good thing. I think if you were a board member and your spouse was the president of the teachers union, it could get kind of crazy at times. So,
Yeah.
She's vice president.
She's vice
and then
president.
so she's an officer. So you've got the double whammy here.
Well, she here
You got all
part of the
3.
negotiating, yeah.
She
She,
was,
I don't think she was
She was not.
negotiating, but vice president.
She's-
of course.
No, she
I
was
have
at
my,
the
or I'm
committee
primary
meeting.
with my insurance.
she's
Yep.
a committee, but yeah, that's part of the vice presidency, but she was, your wife was not on the negotiating.
And just because I'm thinking about it now, anytime you as a board member believe, I've got a slide in here about abstaining. I don't believe in having you abstain unless you really need to. But anytime you need to abstain on a vote and you're going to need to abstain on a vote, you should probably also not participate in the discussion. So when a motion comes forward at the board table and is seconded and the president calls for discussion, if you know you're going to abstain, you can certainly say during the discussion your reasons why you want to abstain, and then abstain. But if it's like a negotiation thing where you're going to have several meetings, probably an executive session leading up to that vote, you should probably recuse yourself from those discussions.
And that's better. Rewind, our district, as being a community member, our OPSI did go on strike here for the 2019, and then I remember as a student here, when I was in school, our OPSI did strike. I mean, that is the last option that you want to see in a community district on both sides.
For sure.
I mean, but how, when negotiating, I guess, I understand it's give take and I mean, how do you get to that point where, I mean, I know it's not the board and I do sit on it.
Right.
But how do you, I mean, open line of communication, I mean, back and forth, I mean, how do districts usually, I mean, when they call a strike, for instance, our OPSI did, I mean, how do you not get to that? I mean,
It's so complex, and I think it's really, I don't want to oversimplify, but I think the fact that there are good communications channels between the union and the district. I think when there's transparency and the people in both collective bargaining units believe what the board is saying about its budget and believe what the board is saying about how tight or not tight money is, and believe what the board is saying about its priorities and its goals. I think when there are those ongoing communications and that transparency and good conversations at the board meeting, you're more likely to not have an impasse like this. I think the number one reason why bargaining units strike is because they don't believe what the board is telling them about whatever the pot of money that is there. And there's a lack of trust. And so anything you can do as a board and encouraging your administrators to keep that collaborative and open conversation going, I think you're going to be well off.
I mean, building trust with that, I mean, with the community, and that's something when I was appointed that I would like to do. I mean, how do you, I mean, you have recommended, how do you get the community behind? I mean, I feel our worst enemy right now is ourselves here in this school district.
Sure.
We should, instead of, and I'm about having open line of communication. I'm not going to send an email. I'm not going to send a text. I know I'm not up. I know that's where it's at right now. But I'd like to talk to you, face to face or more, and they should have, have an open door policy. But I know in this district, Mr. Wrench can say my door is always open. Well, the chain of command, it should be him before they come to a board member. But we here at Claymont, we don't do it. We go to board members first. We're not going so.
And you know what? And we're going to talk about this,
Okay.
but if people go to board members and board members get involved, guess what's going to happen? They're going to keep coming to board members, right? You set up a precedent and you're setting the table. So we've got some slides that are going to talk
Okay.
about that. So I hope you'll all open up.
Remind me of the Facebook post then. There was a-
I don't have Facebook. So I
Well,
don't-
there's a Facebook post that some of them share with me. So if you don't get what you want from the administration, contact the new chain of command is contact the board member. Someone put that on Facebook. and shared it.
Kidding. I haven't been on Facebook for a long time.
They put that on just recently
Uh,
or last year?
No, this was in the last several weeks. I don't know who shared, I don't know who shared it with me, but then.
Yeah,
a couple
so-
people Heard it.
You are, if you can
I'd like
keep,
a copy of that.
yeah,
See it.
we'll talk about that here. Okay.
I want to see.
That, no,
I tried to rewind.
I'm glad that you brought it up.
So
So
I never saw it as far as personally on my.
Yes.
phone.
I think,
If somebody said
Yeah.
that,
Like someone local
if somebody
Right.
said that, I want them
Yep.
to give us,
And-
I want to see it.
and it's to
Does
sing, the
anybody
way
can
you
say what
build
they want.
trust
I
is
wanna
to
see that really
sing
was written.
out of the same hymn book.
I don't know who shared
Mm-hmm.
that, what ask in the office, but somebody in the office shared that. I don't know who that
Because I
was.
think that lends to what Aaron was saying, right? Like somebody comes to you and says, oh, this was posted on Facebook, if you can't go, you don't need to go to the administration, you just go to the board members, they'll do it. And I know that that's not my philosophy at all, but that's part of what feeds this perpetual problem that we have is
Yeah.
somebody comes and tells you that, my first instinct is show me. I want to see it. Or are you just telling me this to create some kind of friction?
Or if
between
somebody
the
says,
board and me as an administrator, because I've got 3 new board members. So how do I know it's not true?
or if
it
somebody
doesn't
comes to you as a
work.
board member and say, I understand that if I don't like what Mr. Wrench tells me, I should just come to you.
And I would be like,
Then I'd be like, where did you hear that?
Yeah.
Why
wanna
do you
know.
think that is
Yep.
true?
Because
Yeah.
That's part of, when you go back a couple slides and you talk about trust, we 3 of us are new, to this board. They don't know me. I don't know them. And when you have that kind of conversation in central office among administrators, the very first question should be, I need to see that. because
Right.
I don't know whether it's true or whether people are just generating chatter to create and keep,
To stir the pot.
to stir between the
Yeah.
Board of Education. And we can't have that.
So
We just can't function that way.
I really appreciate you saying that, because the number one thing you can do to keep those open lines of communication and to build trust in your community is to be as candid and honest as you can be, as professional and and positive. And I don't believe there's, and I say this all the time, there is not a single conversation that you should be having at the board table that's appropriate for boards, that's about governance, that's about your responsibility to your school district, that can't be had professionally. And most of those, there's a few exceptions, but most of those can and should also happen in public session. And I think what sometimes feeds a community perception that there's stuff going on behind closed doors is when we have boards that don't discuss. And we'll talk about why that happens sometimes and why it shouldn't happen. So let's move on to the next slide. So here's one of the first ones. I've got several scenarios in here. Board member Sarah is a former teacher. Her best friend and brother are teachers in the district. Sarah knows the board will be in some ways opposing the teachers union in the upcoming negotiations. So what would you advise Sarah to do? And you are all Sarahs. 3 of you are Sarahs in this group. So based on what we were just talking about, what do you plan on doing if this is a situation?
I wouldn't, you can't discuss it.
Right.
I mean, I appreciate the fact that my friend and my brother are teachers in the district. I mean, I appreciate the fact that my husband's a teacher in this district, but there are some things that do not leave the confines of the Board of Education conversation.
There you go.
And that's one of them.
So negotiations is one that will get you in legal trouble.
Oh, for sure.
Grievances, money, front above the fold, stories in the newspaper. So you don't want that to happen. Maintain your friendships, maintain your relationships with your spouses. And it can be difficult if you're heading into a sticky negotiation, or there's even if it's not going to be sticky, but there's one point that the Teachers Association or that the OPSI group really wants to drive home, and you're a board member, your job right now is to advocate for the board as it concerns negotiations. So what I would tell Sarah here is during negotiation season, and particularly while the board is having conversations in executive session about negotiations, is you don't talk about the agreements. You just don't talk about it. And you don't want to do anything that's going to lead to a grievance or to an unfair labor practice filing. It's embarrassing, and it could be expensive. So stay away. Okay, good board self-management. A well-designed orientation program. I don't know what kind of orientation program you all had since you got elected, but I hope that there is something. And whatever there is, I hope that it either is or will be become part of your infrastructure. New board members should be provided copies of the collective bargaining agreements, copies of the superintendent's and treasurer's contract. They should know how to access the policy manual and how to search for particular policies. Board members should have been availed of a tour of the campus. If you haven't already done that, I hope you can find time to do that with your superintendent, to look inside your buildings and to have a nice tour of your campus. New board members should probably have meet and greets, and usually that's done through the board meeting, but meet and greets with key administrators. And we want that to happen. So orientation is important. Ongoing education like this is really important. The opportunity for any of you to get additional education in any aspect of board leadership that's interesting to you. I hope that your district will be able to help you do that. And then guidelines for your interaction with the group. We're going to talk about those. And then an annual board self-assessment. So once a year, after you evaluate your superintendent and treasurer, I hope the 5 of you will be open to a conversation where you can say, what did we do really well this year? What are we not doing still so well? What do I, individual board member, believe we could get better at? Where do we want to improve next year? I think that's an excellent sign of great board self-management.
Question, evaluating, just recently appointed, how do I evaluate Mr. Ranch and Mrs. Becker just coming to the board?
Okay, you will have a process for that. You'll have a policy that says this is Claymont's superintendent evaluation, treasurer evaluation policy. I think it's a great policy for all of you to look at and all of you to agree to. The law says evaluate your superintendent and your treasurer every year. It says nothing about how you have to do it. So if you are a district that says, we're going to sit down in the summer with our 2 administrators, get their feedback on what they'd like to accomplish this year. And then at the end of the year, our board president and vice president are going to take them for coffee and they're just going to have a 20-minute conversation. And that's what we do in our district. That's good. You can do that. If you are a district that says we're going to have a very standards-based conversation about our goals and what they're doing tied to our goals, and we're going to have some formative conversations during the year, we'll go into executive session and just say, Kim, in August, we all agreed that these were the 4 priorities for you this year. How's it going? And we're going to have a couple of those conversations a year, and that's going to lead to a summative evaluation where all 5 of us and our treasurer sit down in executive session and we talk about how the year went, and we come up with a couple ideas for her improvement and a couple things that we think she's done super, super well. And we're going to put that in a 2-sentence paragraph and put it in the personnel file. You can do that too. So the 5 of you should talk about what has been kind of recent history for evaluation in the district and how that still feels for you. There are lots and lots of evaluation materials on the OSBA website. I can send them to you. You can dig around for them if you'd like, but you don't have to do anything. You can just talk about what feels good for you.
When is the last time you've been evaluated? Have you been evaluated?
Yes, formally was my first year. And other than that, it was in conversations with the board. Yeah.
I would like
As
for,
far as written was 2 years ago.
What's the
Do
board
we have a
policy?
policy?
What is the policy?
I don't know. No.
I thought it was every year.
yeah, usually,
Has to be
usually your
every year.
policy is pretty general, just says the board's going to evaluate the superintendent, but your policy may actually go into a little bit of detail. And if you don't like that detail, change it. But I've never known a superintendent or a treasurer that was worth their salt that didn't appreciate a conversation and the opportunity to share with the board the things they are most proud of this year. And for the 7 of you to have a good conversation about priorities. Oftentimes it starts with the 2 of them coming up with what they want to accomplish this year. They bring it to the 5 of you and the 5 of you say, yeah, that looks good. But in addition, we hope you'll pay some attention to this or that, and you all agree and you move forward. But one of the most frustrating things for me is when a board member calls me in April and says, Cheryl, can you send me some information? It's time for us to evaluate our superintendent. And I say, be happy to do that. Do you have, how are you all with his goals? The goals that you set? Like, well, we never really talked about that. How do you evaluate somebody if you've never talked about what you expect them to do? And there are 5 of you, and it's a difficult thing to have 5 bosses. So I think the bottom line is that he needs to know what you're expecting, as does your treasurer. So find your evaluation policy and have a conversation. Okay, communicating with each other and with the Claymont school community. Next slide. And this will go to your questions a little bit ago. So when you have a disagreement, when you disagree with your community, when you disagree with your administrators, when you have a principal that's at odds with the superintendent or maybe even with the board, I really like this when I find it. If you can all keep in mind that it's a problem versus us. It's not you and me. We all have different opinions and you come at things from diverse perspectives. And that, I think, makes your solution richer, but it can create some heartburn along the way. But if you can remember it's you and me versus the problem, we're good to go. Next slide. So as a leadership team, next button. how do we returnally share information as a team? So tell me how you do that. When you come up with a draft agenda for the board meeting do you have a conversation with the board president about that?
We have, yes.
Okay. And so you all have a draft agenda. How does that get shared with the other four?
This evening, they received their draft agenda in their packets
Okay.
for Monday. And
Okay.
the agenda itself then will be on Monday night. So sometimes there's no change to the agenda.
Okay. And when typically do they get the draft agenda?
Typically it's Thursday.
Good. That's great. That's actually a day earlier than a lot of districts that have Monday meetings. You have meetings Mondays? Monday meetings, a lot of board members get their packets on Friday. So if you can get your board members their packets on Thursday, you're ahead of the curve. If you have something you want to share with all 5 board members, like, do you do like a Friday report,
I do.
heavy hits or something like that? Does that get shared via email?
Yeah, email through Google Doc.
Okay. And when you send an email, do you send it to all 5 board members
Yes.
together?
Yes.
Okay. So all of you get it at the same time. That is the number one thing for me, is I want all of you to get information at the same time and have it be shared in the same way. Do all 5 of you have a Claymont Schools email address? Good. And you're all using it?
I already have
Start.
2 email addresses. It's hard.
It is
We
hard.
talked about it earlier. I said, I have my work email address, I have my personal email address, and now I have a Claymont school email address.
I do too.
You know?
Yep,
and
it is hard.
It's work is priority and.
But if you get public records requests, it makes your life a lot easier. If all they have to do is do a search for your email through your Claymont Schools address. I also think it's one of the things, it's a small thing you can do to build credibility with the community. When you are emailing community members as a school board member, it's great for you to have a Claymont Schools address. When you're emailing people that may not know you as a board member, maybe it's a community member from another community, maybe it's another board member that you get to know and you're emailing each other. Or when you're campaigning or whatever, I think the Claymont Schools address is really a smart play for all of you. If you email something to all 5, and Lois, you're going to respond. So he emails out something on Friday and he says, just want to let you know, this is what happened this week. These are the 10 things I want you to know. And you have a question about something like that. What would be your typical way of,
I emailed back to reply to all.
okay,
Questions sent to everybody.
okay. Caution there. All right. If your superintendent said something to all 5 of you and you have a question, my advice is that you respond just to Brian. If you ask a question back, and especially if anybody else then jumps in and says, great question, Lois, I had that question too. Or since Lois asked a question, I'm going to ask a question. Now you're getting into what we call a round robin meeting. Or a meeting, you're having a meeting outside of the confines of open meetings. It hasn't been noticed, and you're talking about school district business as a group because you're talking reply all, reply all, reply all. So if he sends out his Friday thing, sends it to all 5 of you, that's awesome. If you have a question, my advice is you respond just to him. And then if he says, Lois asked a great question, and I thought some of you would also have that question. So here's her question and here's the answer. And he spits it out again. As long as any of you are just distributing information, but you're not having a conversation, you're not discussing that info, you're good on email. Okay. So
he is able to disseminate back to everybody.
yes, yes. And then everybody responds to him individually. And then again, he just pushes it out. There's no back and forth conversation. You want to be real careful with email.
Our question is to him, but his answer is to everybody.
Right. Again, you asked a great question and he says, you know, that's a great question. They all should know that answer. Or she asked a great question and I really missed providing that key piece of information. He pushes it out to all 5 of you again.
So I asked a dumb question.
There's no dumb questions. Now, though, where it comes to trust and confidentiality, if any of you ever has a question for Brian or Kim or each other, and you have Cindy, you and Michelle have a conversation, and it's about school district business, because two of you can have a conversation, no problem. And at the end of that conversation, Cindy thinks, wow, this is something everybody should know. And so you go home and you put it in an email and you send it to everybody. But Michelle thought your conversation was confidential. Then you have a problem. So if you ever do have conversations that you are not ready to share with the group, make sure you say that. Close your conversation with a, maybe Cindy, maybe you say, you know what, I think this would be something everybody should know. Do you agree? And just get that sort of explicit agreement. And maybe Michelle goes, you know what, my mind isn't straight on it yet. Can you let me think about it for another day or two before we share it with everybody? That's okay too. So never assume that a conversation is going to be shared or is going to be confidential. Make sure you ascertain that before you close the loop. So routine information should be shared with the team, but you do need to be careful. Now, the fact that it's a public record, I could care less about that. If you're having appropriate conversations, I don't care if you have public records requests till the cows come home. It's work for your treasurer, but you're not doing anything that's going to get you in trouble. But what will get you in trouble is if anybody can point a finger, and rightly so, and saying you were having a meeting that wasn't noticed. Okay. All right, next one. The role of the board president. Really glad that your board president meets with your superintendent on your draft agenda. I talk with lots of boards where the superintendent and the treasurer are the only ones that touch the draft agenda before it comes out to the board. So it's really good that your board president is in there. It's good that all four of you, that the four of you that aren't board president, have an avenue to get stuff put on the board agenda if you have an interest. He's probably your route. Give Steve a call and say, I would really like to talk about ESSER funds at the next board meeting, or I'd like another meeting about those middle school math scores. Can we make sure that's on the agenda? Whatever it might be, make sure you all feel free to use your board president. His role this year is to help plan the meetings, to direct traffic during public participation. That's the fun part. We'll talk about that a little bit later. To work with the treasurer to make sure that parliamentary procedure is being appropriate. We don't want parliamentary procedure to feel like something that's scary or that you have to be an expert. You absolutely do not. But there are times that the way you act in parliamentary procedure does obligate you moving forward. We always say you can't unring a bell. And that is true at board meetings once votes are taken. So you want to make sure that you're using procedure appropriately so that you don't do something before you're ready to do it. Next one. Questions to the superintendent or treasurer shared. We kind of talked about this one already. I just want them shared with all of you. If there are questions about anything on the agenda, I hope that you will do your treasurer and your superintendent the favor of asking that question before the board meeting. Call the superintendent and say, just letting you know, item 3 on the agenda, I have a lot of questions about. I have a lot of doubts about it, or I have a lot of questions, or I'm conflicted. Allow your superintendent to walk you through it, to determine whether there might be another piece of information that will help you understand it better. It helps arm him for the meeting. You can even say, Aaron, you could say, I know that you sent out the draft agenda about item 3, and it's about hiring X company to clean the windows in the high school. I think it's a crazy amount of money, and I don't understand how we got there with this. It seems like somebody should be able to clean the windows for a lot less money. Got some problems with this. And then Brian says, okay, well, let me just tell you a little bit about our policy about bidding. Let me tell you how we followed our policy to get these window cleaning bids in, and how we weighed these different bids. But then he's at least knows, that this could come up at the board meeting and he's prepared. And if he walks you through it and you feel a lot better about it, feel free to say, I'm going to ask this again at the meeting, because I think it would be good for the community to know why $25,000 to clean the windows at the high school is a reasonable amount of money and not a lot of money. So even though my question's been answered, just letting you know, I'm going to ask it again at the meeting. I think that's awesome. Next. And so I have another question for you. The 5 of you should talk as a board about what constitutes an emergency. And here's where I say, your superintendent is going to manage 1,000 things a day. And some of them are going to be known to your neighbors. For instance, if a child gets in a fight, if a parent comes to the school about a custody dispute, if a second grader breaks her wrist coming down a slide on the playground and an ambulance shows up at the elementary school, you're going to have neighbors that know things that aren't going to rise to the level of board member notification. And sometimes board members get upset when the neighbor comes next door and says, did you know that there was an ambulance at the elementary school today? And you're like, no. So you should have a conversation about what would have to happen for him to notify you immediately. My general rule of thumb is if it engages a large number of students or teachers, let's say a building had to be evacuated because a fire alarm went off, or last week I heard about a district that had a natural gas leak that made a bunch of students sick. And so there were a bunch of ambulances at the building because a lot of students got sick. What would have to happen that would rise to board member notification? And if it did, Brian, how would you, let's just say, my favorite is the dumpster fire, okay? The literal dumpster fire. There's a dumpster fire at the high school, and it causes the fire department to have to come out, and it causes that wing of the closest to the dumpster is being evacuated and students are being evacuated. How would you tend to be notified that that's happening?
I'll use the example when we dismissed early because we didn't have heat at the intermediate.
Okay, good example.
So just keep them in the loop that we were dismissing early because we couldn't get the heat up. I sent a text message.
Okay.
And I think Cindy replied, thank you, and that was it.
Okay.
So no one else responded regarding, but they were notified that it happened.
Good. So your priority is rightly about the safety and security of your students, your building, your teachers, your staff. So I think that's perfect. If your practice is to send a text to all 5, so you sent one text to all 5, great. So perfect. Same thing goes though. Don't start discussing, right? Thanks for the info and be done. If you have questions, give Brian a call or send him a personal text message outside of the loop of the 5 of you. But something like that, I totally agree with you, is something that the board needs to know about as soon as possible because it involved a large number of students and closing a building.
As far as an ambulance for a kid getting hurt on the playground, I may not even know that sometime.
Right.
To report that.
Right, because the principal took care of it, followed policy, the nurse was on site, whatever, it got taken care of, end of story. But something about those big red vehicles pulling up outside a school building gets neighbors, I call them the nosy Nellies, usually all up in arms.
I've only been on the board a little over a year, and Brian's pretty good. The other day, or it's been a while ago, hopefully it don't happen again, but a student threatened a teacher, and Brian, when everything was handled, because it's not I'd rather them handle the issue,
Right,
but he did, just FYI, police was called to the high school, the teacher was sent home, and the student was removed from the building. And it kind of just gave you, so that when my boys came home, my older boys, of course, they had all the gossip,
sure.
I said, I don't know if you know, Nan, but yeah, I've been notified.
I think that is an example of something the board's probably going to want to know about.
So it was kind of like.
Yeah, I think a
kind of
threat
was
to the
aware of
building,
it
a
before
threat
they
to a
got in the
teacher.
building, yeah, and there was an employee involved, police involved.
Yep.
And a student involved, so it, but the day-to-day, like you said, the ambulance at the playground,
Right,
you don't have time to,
right.
that's not my concern.
So I like the fact that you let the board know about that situation. Okay, next one. All right, relationships with other administrators. You should have relationships with other administrators in your district. I hope you do. But I hope that you also recognize that every administrator in this district reports to Brian or to Kim, depending on the position. And we hope that as it involves district business, not your friendships or the friendship between, the principal's child and your child, but as it affects district business, you will use Brian as your pass-through. So when administrators call you with a problem, or maybe it's not even a problem, it's just an issue. If it's about district business, the standard response should be, thanks so much for reaching out. I'm going to forward this to Brian for his attention. If principals, other teachers, parents in your community know that you're going to direct people appropriately, and most of the time as board members, it's going to be to your employee, to Brian, you will quit getting those calls. You'll still get calls from people talking about baseball or the Bengals in the Super Bowl on Sunday or whatever it might be, and that's great. But you won't get calls about district business because they'll know that you're using your role appropriately. And if everybody gets that message, then there's a spirit of openness in the community, and people know that the board is in governance mode and they're not in gossip mode. They're not in mode to try and solve the problem that my child didn't make the varsity squad or whatever it might be. Visits to buildings, you'll have a policy about that, about board members visiting buildings. Again, if you're visiting as a parent or as an interested community member, you want to go see the spring drama, that's awesome. Do that. If you're visiting the building in an official capacity as a board member, you should book that visit, and you probably even have your superintendent with you as a guide. If you're visiting the building as a parent, make sure that you at least are keeping the perspective in mind that people are seeing you as board members. And so make sure you put people at their ease. I'm here as Shannon's mom. I'm here to watch the play. And because people get nervous, even though you don't want them to, especially teachers will get nervous when board members are in the buildings. We've talked a little about these next couple of items, so I'll jump to the next slide, unless you all have any issues about visiting buildings. Have you done a tour this year yet?
No, we haven't done a tour. We actually did a tour back in November because we were talking ESSER funds, and we had a special board meeting to take a tour. I know Mrs. Host was not available that evening, and Mr. Cottrell wasn't appointed at that point in time. But I do. You've gone through the building.
At the January meeting, I made an announcement. I was on vacation that week. I was available a Thursday. That was my only day that I was available. I did make Mr. Wrench aware. Mrs. Wolf contacted me, also was available, so we did go in. They had administration meeting that day. I did go through the building.
Good.
I wanted to see, did check it out. I saw, I believe, all the principals but one. They did have a meeting hero, so.
Good.
But I wanted it, and I felt I could get in.
I think you should book a tour of the campus annually at whatever time's supposed to, and you may not get all 5 available, and that's okay. But I think it's good it's good. Teachers and principals are usually really proud of their space, and they love having board members through, but they love having it done in an appropriate way. Okay, Mary's a new board member and was a major volunteer at the elementary school for several years, becoming close with the principal. They continue to speak to one another every week or so. Is this okay?
Yep.
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 How so? Or why?
Because they're friends. I mean, I have friends that are in the district and still talk. We just
Yep.
don't talk board business.
I agree. So the one thing I would caution Mary here, and probably you, Cindy, is that, again, that whole, as soon as Brian and you are very clear that you are aware of your appropriate role as a board member and of him as this principal's boss, and you're both respecting those roles, and he trusts that you're always going to respect your role and his role and vice versa, you're good. And they should continue to be friends. Absolutely.
That's what I mean. You just don't talk about, you talk about what you have in common. You don't talk
Right.
about what's going on in the district. It's
Right.
inappropriate.
Yep. No problem. Next one. Okay. So these are conversations. This is I have 2 slides here, and you can go to the next slide about governance conversations. I think, superintendents don't like this, but they need to be accountable. Treasurers need to be accountable, and they want to be accountable, and they need to be accountable to the board. But these are the kinds of questions the board should be asking that keeps the board in governance mode and helps the administration do their work effectively. So having conversations about, if we approve this recommendation tonight, is this all the money we're going to have to spend? If we approve this recommendation, how are we going to know it's working? So we buy this new software that the treasurer is recommending to make payroll easier, whatever it might be. How are we going to know that it is really working? Is it going to save us money? Is it going to just save a ton of time and hours? But these are kinds of questions that your community is going to appreciate you're asking, that are really good governance questions. So what if it doesn't work? Maybe you have a board member, Brian brings forward a recommendation, and Lois is not quite sure about it. And she's been thinking in her mind that she might have to vote no on this one because she's just not quite sure about it. But during the conversation, she becomes convinced. Michelle says something, Cindy says something, and she starts to think, you know what, they have good points. I hadn't thought about that. So I'm probably going to try and support it. But during the conversation, she could say, you know what, if this recommendation passes, I just want everybody to know I have a question about what we're going to do if it doesn't work. What's plan B? How are we going to know that it's working? Which gap is it going to serve? Which of our 4 goals is it tied to? Why is it a priority right now? Those are all fair questions for the board and good governance questions. Okay. So this is the chain of command slide. I want people to talk to you. I think it is your job as the board to hear from your community, and I hope you will do that. I want you to empathize, and I want you to always be positive. You have a job to do as board members to be big advocates for your district and big cheerleaders for your district. And I hope you can do that. When people call and they're upset about something, usually they have a reason to be upset. And so if you can understand and say, I understand why that would be really frustrating to you. I'm really sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry you're upset. I hope that the district can make it right. And I'm directing you to the superintendent, or a complaint about a teacher. I hope you've talked to your child's teacher. I hope you and teacher can come to some agreement about this. But if you can't, I hope you'll feel like you can talk to the principal, and I'll let the superintendent know I've referred you that way. But always empathize. Feel free to follow up and follow through. Email Brian, call Brian and say, I just had a long conversation with Mrs. Jones. She's really been out of shape about the AP curriculum. We had a long talk. I encouraged her to have a conversation with the principal, but I wanted to let you know that conversation happened. Feel free to say to Mrs. Jones, I really hope you'll talk again with the principal. If you don't get a response back, feel free to follow up with me. I think it's certainly within your rights as a board member to make sure that if you're going to ask people to be accountable and you're going to use the chain of command, you need to know that that chain of command is being followed. Any questions here? Okay. So if I said to you, Lois, what's a major stakeholder group in your district? What would you say?
Who is?
Yeah, what's a stakeholder? Who are some of the stakeholders in your district?
District,
Uh-huh.
it's administrators.
Administrators. Okay, good one. Steve, how about you? Who's a stakeholder?
Community.
Community members, for sure. Michelle, what would you say?
Staff.
Staff, for sure. Yep, those are all key ones. Parents, students, business partners, that kind of thing. I think this is a great idea for you to have an annual conversation about this slide. So who are our stakeholder groups? In some communities, it might be farmers. In some communities, it might be manufacturers. In some communities like mine, it could be a particular religious group. In my community, we have a distinct population, a fairly large population of Muslim people. And so we as a board always had to talk specifically about how they were getting our news and how they were receiving our news. So talk about who all your different stakeholder groups are, including the small ones. You mentioned that you're a foster parent, right? So foster children, social service agencies, those are stakeholder groups. The social service agencies that serve your district, that serve kids. Maybe it's food bank. Maybe it's your career center, your educational service center, et cetera. Those are all stakeholder groups. A great conversation once a year for the board is to say, of all of our stakeholder groups and all of our platforms, our district's Facebook page, our district's website, the superintendent's Twitter, if the superintendent has a Twitter account, our principals' Instagram accounts, all of those things. Are we making sure that each of our stakeholder groups sees those? If one of your stakeholder groups is your retired folks, I can tell you they're probably not looking at the district's website. They might be on the district's Facebook page. But make sure that all your stakeholder groups are in touch with one or more of your platforms every year. Your Friday thing that goes out to board members, do you send something similar out to the whole school community on a regular basis? So talk about who's reading that. Do we need to send snail mail? Can we survive with just doing digital communication? Those are great conversations for all of you to have. Next one. Okay, here's another scenario. The district is considering a bond issue for a new high school wing. Board member Sam is very much opposed. In fact, let's say that Sam ran for the board based on his opposition to a potential bond issue. He says people can't afford it, right? He's very vocal about his take, but he knows several other board members probably think the new wing is the best call. What would you do if you're Sam? Now he's on the board and he's been out there about the fact that the wing is not something the district needs to do.
Sam do, you say?
Yeah.
Well, Sam needs to let everybody understand why he's opposed to it.
Okay.
So he needs to voice his opinion of what, I mean, instead of just being, this is what I think, he needs to express why he thinks that way
Yep.
and why he thinks it's the best for the school district and the community that you reconsider towards his item. And then, of course, the board members need to say why they feel the opposite.
Perfect. I agree. Anything else?
Communication, have an open forum, have it.
There you go.
Getting everyone.
Yep.
What's your plan? What's it called? What's the cost?
I had a conversation with a new board member a month or so ago from Parma. And Parma has school buildings that are in incredible need of repair, renovation, rebuild, whatever it is. And he said to me, I know we need new buildings, but we have people in our community that can't afford a levy. They can't afford a bond issue. And I'm trying to advocate for those people. So my thing is, we got to find a bottom line here. The board needs to get together. So two things. The first thing is, I'm going to wager that there's a lot of information that Sam, the community member, didn't know, that now he's going to know as a board member. There's lots of information. The board's probably been apprised of been working with community members, engineers, building people, enrollment data for months and months and months and months. And Sam hasn't been availed of all of that information, but now he's going to be as a board member. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, whenever there's a big decision like this and there's division on the board, we have to understand that what the bottom line is. What's the lowest point where we all agree? Do we all agree in Parma's case? Do we all agree that our buildings stink? Yeah, we agree. We agree that there's a problem there, but we don't agree how to handle that problem. And that's okay. So on the next slide, please. Just like you said, Aaron, let's have a conversation. What data are we using to determine we need a new high school wing? What's it going to cost? Who have we talked to about this? It's probably the Facilities Commission. It could be our community engineers, county engineers, that kind of thing. Have we looked at enrollment data? Maybe Sam didn't know that the current 6th, 7th, and 8th grade class are some of the biggest classes in the district. And by the time they hit high school, they're going to be bursting at the seams. How can we get buy-in? Is there a way we could do a bond issue so that it's less painful for the people who can least afford it? So maybe they want to talk about an earned income tax instead of an income tax or a tax that affects everybody equally. Maybe there are different ways they can structure that bond so that it hurts less. Or maybe they can talk about what can the community gain? Is there a way we could give the community access? I worked with a district a few years ago that got community buy-in by when they built the new gym and workout facilities, they opened those up. They opened the workout facility up to people in the community. So what could we do to get community buy-in? But the bottom line is let's work from the bottom up, and let's talk about how we can structure this so that Sam can either vote yes, or we can gain some buy-in along the way. So regardless of what happens, Sam's obligation is to support the vote of the board. So he can ask all of his questions. He can ask for more data. He can ask for evidence about why he should vote yes. And he can drive everybody absolutely crazy until the board has that communal conversation and the recommendation is made to put that issue on the ballot and seconded, and we open for discussion and everybody shares their opinion, including Sam. And then that vote is made. And hopefully Sam contributes and vote, and the vote is 5-0. If you are having big ticket votes in your district, levies, hiring certain people in the district, certainly superintendent, treasurer, probably also coaches, principals, band directors in some communities. The big ticket votes, buying property, closing a building, re-leveling students, whatever it might be, those, you know what those big ticket items are for you in your district. I hope you can get to 5-0. I would just say, try and continue to have conversations that can get you to 5-0. But if you can't, if after all the discussions, Sam says, you know what, I really appreciate everybody spending so much time educating me about this issue. And I know it's important. I do think that our students deserve the best facilities, but I just can't quite get there on this. I'm just not sure I can get there. And then when the board president calls for the vote and he says no, and it's a 4-1, as far as I'm concerned, after he's said his piece and votes no, it's over. It's over, right? Now his obligation is to support that vote. And so when nosy neighbor Nellie comes up to him in the hallway after the board meeting and says, gosh, Sam, you got to be smarting, man. You know, you really put it all out there, and still, you lost. How do you feel about that? I hope Sam can say, I did my best. I did my best. I said my piece. I shared my thoughts. And now I'm going to do everything I can so that vote to build that new high school wing was the smartest thing the board could have done. I really hope this district proves me wrong. Okay. So by law, that's his obligation as far as I'm concerned. Any thoughts about that? Okay. So long and short of it is, I don't think you always have to be 5-0. But I hope when you're not 5-0, that if you're the 1 or the 2 in a split vote, that you feel like you'll do everything you can to get to yes. And if you can't get to yes, regardless of the vote, you need to support that vote. Okay.
On votes, if it's, say it's 2 abstain and 2, what is?
It doesn't pass. Yeah. An abstention is basically an absent person. So not counted for purposes of the quorum or for purposes of the vote itself. You need 3. Yeah. Almost every vote that you take is going to be a simple majority. So 3. There are a few things, and I think putting a levy on the ballot is one of them, where you have to have a super majority or 4. Yeah. Next. Okay. I love this one. Each board member received an email from community member Doug. Doug tells each of you he's writing to you alone. Michelle, you're the only one I'm sending this to because you're the only one that ever listens to me. Okay. But you all get that. You all get it. But Michelle doesn't necessarily know that because Doug says she's the only one that's getting it. He has a complaint about the band director. What should Michelle do with this email?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, probably forward the email to the superintendent.
Yep. So I would respond to Doug. Thanks so much for your email. Forwarding it to the superintendent for his attention. The band director is his employee. So I'm making sure the superintendent has this email. Thanks very much. Now, what you probably know because you're smart is that all 5 of you got that email. And he told all 5 of you, you're the only person getting this email. Maybe he emailed all 5 of you. So if he doesn't email all 5 of you, if he emails all 5 of you individually, rather, I hope all 5 of you will say, thanks so much for your email. I'm forwarding it to the superintendent for his comment. What Dougs do when they do this is they're hoping that they get at least one really different response. They're hoping one board member says, I agree with you. That band director has always been a problem, or whatever it might be. But can you go to the next slide, please? So the you only email usually isn't a you only email. If Doug actually sent it to all 5 of you, then according to your policy, do you have a policy? Who is the official spokesperson for your district?
I am.
Okay. So you can, if he wrote to all 5 of you, then I think it falls to the board president to respond on behalf of all of you. And the board president can say, thanks for your email. We've all received this email, forwarding it to the superintendent for his action. Or if it wasn't about the band director, maybe it's from a newspaper reporter and it comes to all 5 of you. Board president should respond and say, on behalf of the board, just thank you for your email, forwarding it to the superintendent for his action. But the you only email usually isn't you only. The anonymous letter and email, do you all ever get anonymous stuff?
Throw it away.
And so your typical reaction is to throw it away?
If you can't sign it and you can't stand behind it, don't send it.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think oftentimes the only time it gets some attention, and probably rightly so, is if it does include a threat. If it includes a threat to a teacher, a staff member, or a student, or a building, it probably is going to get some attention. But in general, I totally agree with you. I think if people have an issue, they should come to the board meeting, or they should put their name on their email. Okay, next one. Board member Deb's a great writer. She'd like to contribute an editorial to the local paper about the district's strategic planning progress. Should this happen? Is this one okay?
I think only if the board agrees and that it's done in conjunction with the superintendent.
Agree. First of all, I think this is awesome. This is positive, right? You got to feed positive stories to the paper. Or maybe it's to the district's Facebook page or whatever it is. But I think Cindy is exactly right. Deb needs to say to the board, I'd be happy to write that article. I'm really into our strategic plan. I think I'm a pretty good writer. And the 5 board members need to be able to see a draft, talk about it at a board meeting, and bless it. And then I would like it if Deb could then write that and say, I've been asked by the board to contribute this editorial to the paper about our strategic plan, and happy to do it. So none of you should ever, as a Lone Ranger, for lack of better words, act on behalf of the board without the blessing of your colleagues. Okay, next one. Board member Jerry is concerned about an upcoming board agenda item. He believes more people in the community should be aware of this issue and a potential decision. He'd like to use his Facebook page to encourage people to get involved. Hey, everybody, hope you come to the board meeting tomorrow night. We're going to be talking about masking. It's an important issue in the district, so please turn up. Is this one okay?
I would think if that's the only thing, if you're just simply making a statement, you're not giving an opinion one way or the other of how the board thinks or what you think, or imposing your thoughts onto the board as a whole. I would never personally do that, but yes, it's a statement.
I can understand your thought there. I think board members should be out of the social media business in terms of board district in terms of district business. I think you should use your Facebook page for cat pictures or kid pictures or food pictures or whatever it is that people use Facebook for. But I think your anything you can do to drive people to the district's official social media platforms is what you should do. I don't like board members talking about district business on social media because I believe, again, it's the Lone Ranger thing. It's my opinion. I think this is an important issue, whatever it is. I think it's okay to use your Facebook page or your Instagram to say, I hope everybody buys a ticket and comes and supports the kids at the spring play. That's okay. Not a controversial thing. But if it's concerning an item that's coming up on your agenda where there could be a difference of opinion, or whether it's spending money, I mean, whatever, I just think the best policy is, as a board member, I'm not going to use Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is to talk about district business.
Now, I think that what can come into play with that is back to communication, right? You have to find the right means of communication to reach the stakeholders.
Exactly.
And you may have, like you said, the elderly who maybe don't have a kid in the district, don't really know what's going on in the district, but maybe they're friends with, Michelle on Facebook.
Right.
So I think, like, back to my point where it's a statement, like, hey, you should, didn't see the agenda or whatever. I don't know that it can necessarily be wrong. If you're not imposing, if I'm not saying, hey, the board wants to make a mask mandate on my social media type thing, you should come to the meeting and like kind of back to Sam, right? It's my own personal type of agenda, but I think we have to, as a board, figure out what those platforms are to reach the stakeholders and maybe it's getting more people, maybe it's more of, hey, if you haven't liked the Claymont District School website or looked at
Do
it,
that.
you need to check it out, or hey, if you haven't
Exactly.
liked the
That would be my
district's page,
take.
you need to like the district's page type thing. We have to just figure that out.
Yeah, I think if Michelle has 1,000 students on Facebook, this is an opportunity for the district.
Right.
But I
In the
think
right
if
way.
Michelle says, hey, everybody, You might not know I'm a new school board member at Claymont City Schools. I'm not going to discuss school district business on my personal Facebook page, but I sure hope all of you that are my friends will go to this and
Like it.
put in the link and like the Claymont Schools Facebook page. That's your official source of information. And if you have a Facebook page and people come in and say, what did you think about this? Or did you hear about principal that? Or did you talk about the ESSER funds at last night's meeting? You can say, news about that is on the district's website or on the district's Facebook page.
Check it out.
Check it out. Yeah. Okay, next. I don't know if you have a social media policy in your district. It's not a mandate that you do. It's not a state mandate that you have a social media policy, but I just include this slide to say that if you do have a social media policy or want to create one, these are some of the things that we look for in policies. Social media is a key tool for your staff and for your district to get the word out to your community, but it needs to be used in the right way. Next. Okay, a little bit about, we've talked about this. So this is just the legalese about Open Meetings Act, and all of you will now have access to this presentation because it's on your hard drive or whatever now. So we can go to the next one. This just basically says it can include, Open Meetings Act includes email and text messages. Those are discoverable information sources. So regarding virtual meeting attendance, so this is the one I was telling you about, House Bill 51. That's on the governor's desk for his signature. They may walk this back, but currently, as of today, this is the rule that if you have a virtual meeting or board members want to attend virtually because one of you has a home in the Bahamas and you want to go down there for 3 months in the winter, first of all, take me with you. And second of all, you can't jump into your board meeting and be counted, be paid, make a motion, second a motion, vote. Okay. So if you attend virtually, I'm glad that you want to stay in touch. If you're having a business trip and you want to, stay in touch, that's awesome. But you're basically just a viewer for purposes of legal action. Okay. Next one. So we've talked a little bit about this. Is this the way you're seated for you? This is your board meeting seating. I like this. I like the fact that your board president is basically central and that you're all there. Are your principals ever at your board meetings?
They are.
Always?
No, about the only time that they're not are June and July.
Okay. I think that's good and good of them to come. They have busy really days. So good of them to come. They sit here in the front row or.
Sometimes
Throughout.
they're scattered.
Okay, good. My point is, I think these are the 7 that should be at the front. So I like the way you've done this. I like the way you do the pledge. I would just add your vision statement. I think that would be a good thing for you to add when you do your pledge. And then basically this is your opportunity to talk. So your community doesn't know how much work you're doing behind the scenes. They don't know that you spent 6 hours reading the board packet. They don't know that Aaron and Lois had 4 conversations about some topic that Lois was confused about. They don't know that Aaron then had a conversation with Cindy to see how she felt about that issue a few days later. They don't know that 3 of you met with the superintendent at different times to talk through different things that are important. They don't know that the board president, that Steve has had 6 conversations since the last board meeting with the superintendent to get ready for the meeting. They don't know any of that. So the fact that all of you now got your ducks in a row is awesome. But then when you get to your meeting and it's motion made, seconded, discussion, and it's crickets, and then you take the vote and it's 5-0 because all of you got your ducks in a row, your community doesn't know that. And that's where communities start to doubt, or they think you're rubber stamping or whatever it is. So the fact that you did your homework is awesome. Share that. Try and have a couple items on every agenda at least where you feel like you walked away and you thought, you know what, we had good discussion about that. I don't want you to beat a dead horse, and I don't want you to have extended conversation about the pro forma stuff on your agenda that you have to take care of. But I do want you to have some discussion. And at the end of that discussion, toward being community engaged and toward getting your community more invested. It would be great if you said something like, well, we've just had 10 minutes of conversation about this. What are the two things that we think are most important about the conversation we've just had? Or you look at Brian or you look at Kim and you say, Kim, that was a great conversation about the budget. What are the two things, if all five of us were going to go out in the community over the next 2 weeks and share two things about your report, what two would you want us to share? And you all write that down, and then all five of you are going out and you're singing the same song over the course of the next few weeks. That's a really good thing for the district. Steve hears things different than Cindy does. What Cindy sees as important to the conversation might be different from what Aaron sees. And so just having that conversation about what can we all agree was an important takeaway from this conversation is a good way to close those loops. Next. Do you take hard copy minutes? Do you post minutes online? How fast do you usually get them up?
I just thought that I'd wait till they get approved.
Right, after they get approved, how?
Right, and with this new website we've got up, it's a lot easier, so.
Good for you. I think that's great. As we've said, differences of opinion, I think that's great. I think you all have some other, for Lois, it might be the cost of things. For Michelle, it might be the stuff that affects students. For Steve, it might be the stuff that affects, whatever, curriculum or sports or something like that. You all have different passions, and that's good. And that makes your conversations richer. We've already talked about voting and accepting the majority opinion. And then I hope that when you do have a meeting that gets a little bit frustrating, you can all take a big breath and move on before the next one. This is the slide I was telling you about abstaining. I don't think you should abstain because it's going to be a hard thing. Don't abstain because your neighbors will be mad. Abstain because the law says you need to or ethics says you should. Then abstain. But do be willing to make those tough calls. That's why you were elected or appointed. You talked about your committees. It sounds like you manage your committees really well. And the only point on this slide is we have administrative committees where board members may be included. Do you have a facilities and grounds committee, for example?
Administrative committee, yes.
Okay, good. So buildings and grounds, I believe, is an appropriate administrative committee. It's doing the work, it's doing operational work about your facilities for the superintendent's action and approval. Now, you could have a board member on that committee, and that doesn't make it a board committee. What makes it a board committee is if it's coming to the board, if the board has blessed the committee to do the work, to sort of shortcut the board's work and bring recommendations forward to the board. So policy is the perfect example of a committee that probably is a board committee. And my only points about the difference between a board committee and an administrative committee is a board committee must be noticed, minutes taken, open to the public. So that's why they're different than administrative committees. Board members can sit on either, but board committees must be open. Okay. Next. All right, as we come into the home stretch here, the 6 legal uses of executive session. This is really important. The reason we have executive session is because you're talking about things that can obligate the district. Money, time, staff, very controversial issues, matters required to be kept confidential are student-related issues. If you ever, as a board, have to be involved in a student-related issue, maybe it has something to do with an expulsion, could be a student who was hurt in a school building. I don't know, something like that. But student-related matters, as long as those students are minors, are required to be kept confidential. Security or emergency planning, your emergency plans can be kept confidential. For instance, I always have to knock wood. Occasionally, board members need to talk and be refreshed about the ins and outs of your plans. Should you have an active shooter, or should there be a natural disaster? We don't have earthquakes in Ohio, but some districts do. And so it's not good for the general community to know the details of your security plans. So when you go into executive session, just be very careful about stating the agenda. Board president needs to state the agenda and be specific about that agenda item. If you have guests that are coming, your legal counsel, an architect, a principal, maybe a teacher, if there is somebody that's coming into your executive session to give you some background or some context about your conversation, invite them in, and then please ask them to leave before the 5 of you begin to have your conversation. So we don't want your guests to necessarily know which board member was pro an issue and which board member was maybe on the other side of the fence. We only want the results of the full board discussion to be known. And then again, in executive session, no notes, no minutes, and no recording. Do any of you have any questions about executive session? Good. Okay, next one. All right, this is my last scenario. So board member Darby had lunch with his friend Sam. After that lunch, he realizes he inadvertently shared content from a recent executive session with Sam. What should Darby do? So Aaron, you're the person that had loose lips at lunch. What do you do?
I would.
Hmm?
I said I would.
You said you wouldn't.
I would.
You wouldn't. Well, that's good. I hope you don't. 9 times out of 10, when we hear from districts that executive session stuff got leaked, it was inadvertent. It was the end of a long night. You had a long meeting. You said something, and then the next you went, oh my gosh, that was executive session. The problem is, if it concerned, I don't know, a teacher, for example, could result in a grievance, could result in a lawsuit. So if you are the person that shares something from executive session inadvertently, you have to fess up. You need to call the superintendent or the board president, and you need to share. And then hopefully also you call Sam. And you say, Sam, that conversation we had about X was confidential. I shouldn't have shared that with you. I hope that you will keep confidence and keep that to yourself. If you have a board member who cannot keep executive session stuff to him or herself, you are sunk, right? Not only is it, could it cost you money, but it can certainly cost you trust and respect. The only people that talking outside of school affects is you. You all want to be seen by your community members as having the highest ethical standards. And here's executive session is one where it shows. So if any of you cannot keep executive session private, I believe it is the responsibility of the other 4 of you to call that person on it. You have to be very candid and upfront about executive session. Next. All right, this is public participation. So a community member comes up, public participation, frustrated about something to do with your busing and transportation, and one of you thinks it's an easy fix. What are you going to do? In the meeting, after this parent comes up and she's very frustrated about her children's bus.
She's talking to the board.
She's talking to the board.
I wouldn't say anything after she's, it should be a discussion among the board if I think that there is a fix or that, hey, have we considered this? But to respond, and I wouldn't respond.
Okay, next slide. I agree with Cindy. It is not your job to respond to the community in public participation. First of all, public participation is a privilege. It's not in law. You don't have to give it, but every district I know does it, and I'm glad you do. But public participation is designated for you to hear comments from your public. So I'm really glad you do. The reason we don't respond, and it's okay if you say this, Steve, to your community at the beginning, the reason we may not respond is because the 5 of us may not have had an opportunity to consider what you're bringing to the board. When we have considered it, we may make a public comment, but you don't have to answer questions. You definitely don't want to get into arguments. The only person of the 5 of you that should speak at all during public participation is probably your board president. He'll kick it off and he'll direct people. If this woman that has an issue about the buses comes to public participation, I would expect board president might say, thank you so much for that comment. I'm going to ask the superintendent to make sure you're put in touch with our transportation supervisor, and that the board president might say something like that. Try not, even if they're antagonistic or really hacked off. People get really upset sometimes at public participation. If it affects their wallet or their children, they're going to be emotional, and they should be, right? But you don't need to respond, and you need to try and keep things as positive and professional as you can. What I would say that's not on this slide is if it ever gets controversial in here, it gets hot, any one of the 5 of you can call for a recess. A recess does not require a motion or a vote. So if Michelle's upset and she can see the rest of her colleagues are being abused, or whatever, she can say, I'd like to take a 5-minute recess, and you get up and you leave the room. Okay. If you want to adjourn the meeting, if Steve says, well, this is way out of control and we've had all we're going to take tonight on this, you can certainly call to adjourn the meeting, and that does require a motion. Just say, Steve, you just look around and say, can I have a motion to adjourn? And take a vote and get up and leave. Any questions or issues with the way you manage public participation? Good. Okay, next. My last slide. In the spirit of open communication, I hope that all of you can have a conversation once a year with your administrators where you 5 say to them, is there anything we could do better, differently, change the way we're behaving to make your jobs easier as our superintendent and our treasurer? We want to support you to be the best administrators you can be, and vice versa. I hope they will say to you, is there anything we should do as your superintendent or as your treasurer better, differently, to make your job as board members and advocates for our community, advocates of our community? Is there anything we could do better and differently to make your jobs easier? I think if you can start your conversations or your evaluation conversations with those questions, you're all gonna be just fine. Do any of you have any other questions for me? Any other issues you'd like to talk about? Any other sticking points? Okay.
I would like to say thank you. It was very informative.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate your time.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I wish you all the best in 2022. And I hope that we are clearly post-pandemic here in the next couple. Are you doing well here in the district with your numbers?
Yeah. A couple weeks ago, we had a large spike in students, but when we first started school, I think that we have to report our COVID numbers to the health department, and the health department then it ends up in the paper. So the paper reports that. So we had some high numbers then, but we've definitely subsided with our numbers.
Have you been in school since August?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, they're talking about endemic versus pandemic.
The hospital numbers are going down in our community.
Yeah, I think statewide.
Yes.
Yeah. I know in our community, it's really
Dropped.
Yeah.
Go back to session here, follow up. The board, OSB workshop with our ESSER fund options. Mr. Wrench's got a few additional.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Host back in January asked for the cost of our options and what they would be. So working with Mrs. Lint and Mrs. Beckley, we have that. But option one, that's the option that we had presented, which was the classrooms at the elementary and a play space. So in that packet, it had the total estimated cost of $3,349,269.14. And I included with that, fingers here should be, I included with that a drawing of that rendering. The second option we had was like expanding the high school, and that would add 6 classrooms, and we look at expanding the industrial arts classroom. And well, I'll go back to option one though. On option one, it was the options as part of this building realignment would look at the closure of either the Intermediate or Trenton Avenue buildings. And the grade banding would be high school 8-12, middle school 5-7, intermediate Trenton 2-4, and elementary would be preschool through 1. The option 2, and I would say that came through conversations with administrators about would this be a possibility to look at, and we ran some numbers, ran it through the board back before the new year, and said, yeah, let's take a look at those options and see what that would cost. On that sheet, we have 3 different breakouts. Ideally, the first breakout will be the 6 classrooms, the $2,896,017.87. The additional vocational lab would be $695,848.76. And why we'd be looking at expanding that, because the project Lead the Way would be also within that facility, and that gives also Mr. Peters a little more space to run industrial arts. When we were also looking for a security vestibule, that came in a little more than what they originally thought they would look at, but that was $36,987. All 3 of those options exceed the budget of ESSER. So that's where we would say with the options 1 and 2, $3,591,866.63, which is the top of available of the ESSER dollars there. The building realignment would be the high school 7-12, middle school 4-6, and again, the intermediate or Trenton Avenue could become 2-3, or in the elementary preschool 1. And then if we just work on renovating the buildings, and this one you have to go through the budgets a little more accordingly, and that's why Mrs. Lint is here. So maybe we can direct some of the direct questions there as we look at those. But those budgets, overall, we were looking at a budget of $3,254,847 as far as the renovations, which are allowable under the ESSER dollars. As you can see, what we were taking on was anything allowable to try to fix and upgrade. The budgets for the buildings, need to turn mine sideways a little bit. $516,000 for the high school, $290,000 for the middle school. I'm sorry, my contacts are not real good right at the moment. I think that's $856,575. And then that's at the intermediate elementary, $580,272. And a primary, I think that's $857,000. And then the stadium, we have some things there, $130,000. And the bus garage, $25,000 for our total. So there's on those. And the second sheet is the capital outlays as far as where it's budgeted. And it continues with the next several sheets. And then the last option that we were discussing was by looking at the survey results, it wasn't a fourth option. It was just by looking at the survey results. And whenever say that we lack a good bit of play space at the primary building and scheduling, looking at that would give us an option 4 of doing some restructuring. And that was high school would remain the same, middle school would be still 6-8. The intermediate could become 3-5. Trenton Avenue, which would be the elementary, would become 1-2, and then Eastport, because it would give them more space for preschool. And with those restrooms in particular, the primary would move over to the Eastport building and be a preschool K building. So those, and that was doing all the renovations that were as part of option 3. So I don't know if you have any particular questions you need to ask regarding those numbers, and that's why, again, Mrs. Lentz here to.
When we were at recess, I just want to say that I did ask Mrs. Lent about the chiller units and when those were last installed, because I was interested in the longevity of the life of it. So she did let me know that those chiller units were installed in 2000. So
I'm sorry, Cindy, the what
the
building?
chiller units for all of them.
Oh, okay. They were
I
all.
was
2000.
curious. You know, there's a difference between a Band-Aid and
Right.
and a long-term fix. So if chiller units only last a couple of years, that's a problem. But if they're lasting 20 years, that's a different obviously approach or thought
Right.
process on my part on how that is. So I kind of went through this too and looked through it. I haven't been to the schools, but I know Mr. Cottrell visited the schools, and I was looking on here because there's humidity problems that are addressed. Do we not have that at the middle school in the basement with issues down in is that what we were talking about that, right?
Yeah, there's water. What year did it? It
it was a problem. I was there for open house, or not open house. First,
Yes.
open, whatever you call that. The
Open
day you
house?
came to, yeah,
Yeah, open house before school
open house,
starts. Yeah.
before school. It was really bad.
Mhm.
Right. So then air conditioning units don't work. You can't, you couldn't cool as well because yeah. Oh.
The other thing that has to be addressed immediately is the heating at the intermediate building. There's currently 4 boilers, 3 are operable, two are really operable. The third is kind of milking its way through. So that has to be done irregardless, because, yeah. And those boilers, as you have stated, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we can't go as energy efficient with those boilers because they are retrofitted to that building specific because of where they are in the basement and how they have to pipe them out different areas. Am I correct on that?
But these are still covered by ESSER funds.
Mhm.
So if I just want to make sure I understand this right too. So the information that we got, I think 4 and 5 have the same backups, I think.
They do.
They do, okay. The upgrades are 3.2 million. Then after that are the anticipated capital X expenses that we will have for the next 4 years. Is that right? Well, you have what we have, I'm sorry. So
So which one you on, Cindy? I'm
So-
sorry.
that's okay. Under option 4,
4, okay.
so this first sheet is, this is ESSER, right? Then this stuff on here,
Yeah.
21, 22, we're done, right? Yeah, it says ESSER, that's what I'm saying. These are other things in addition. So outside of the ESSER funds, of the 21, 22, because that's the year we're in. How much of the 378,000 have we already spent, or have we not spent any? Are these all things that are happening this spring? The garage roof stadium for 25,000, the roof maintenance, what's roof maintenance? So all of this stuff has to, well, what are the chillers? If we're buying new chillers, then what's the $50,000?
We don't have the money, like. We keep buying parts and buying parts,
Okay, so assuming,
which would be your short term.
right, so assuming the board went with option 3 or 4 and spent the 3.2 million on fixing these things, then what of this list comes off?
Um,
Well, you can have one, because I think I have 2 of them, I think.
They're identical, but yes, it was the capital plan from up for the 5 years that we had, what we were looking at, what needs replaced with the money that we had available.
Yeah, that's how I understand it. I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to understand, we have a CapEx policy and assuming, under the assumption that we would say, you know what, we're gonna go with, here, Beth. We're gonna go with option 3 or 4, and we're gonna fix everything. My question then becomes, of this capital, I've got a couple things here, and the numbers are, I'm confused a little bit, right? I got this capital through 2021 and a capital through 2025. So which one should I look at? Should I be looking at the one that ends in 377 or 141? Because I feel like they're kind of the same thing, kind of, but a little bit different. And I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it.
Well, what I did not take, when we went back. I didn't really go back and take off everything off of the capital outlay and say, that's no.
Right.
Some of the stuff that, because the board was saying we're going to add options, I basically went here and said, what are we, but there's some money, but not free.
Right.
Yes. Yes, we did. So I was going through here and saying, okay, what are the things
You have to do with that $1 million.
within a couple $1 billion to do it? So that's why you see on here, chillers, $50,000. I don't have money to replace them, so I'm going to keep buying parts and putting money at.
Okay.
and then keep them running.
Okay, I understand that. And it's probably my fault because I probably didn't ask the question the right way in January. But of these things, one has cap through 2025 and one has cap through 2021. Which one should we be looking at, or should we be looking at both of them? Do they have different information on them, or are they the same information just laid out differently? No, that's okay. And for me, I mean, right, I'm just trying to understand.
I would look to me, I would look at capital through.
Okay,
Other one.
okay. That's either already been taken care of or off the drawing board or, okay.
You know, and I'm really kind of waiting on, decision of where to go, where I have.
No, and I can appreciate that, but for me, it's right. Every one of them is an option. So either option 1 or 2. So now I'm on 3 and 4, and I'm just trying to analyze in my mind. If we keep what we've got, it's going to cost us $3.2 million, right? So then it becomes a matter of budget and finance for the next 4 years. What does our capital outlay look like then? Does that make sense? Because we have to, so that's where I'm trying to
Some of
get.
this stuff won't be included anymore, right? Because
Right.
it'll be included with the other stuff, right?
Right,
Okay,
The
so,
confusing part was if you go 1 or 2.
right.
Right.
I can't do everything that's on.
All the rest.
The CapEx.
On
you
the
have
right.
to do.
And we're gonna have to make the person that's what we do in the 1 week would be, okay.
What are we gonna pick and
$1 million,
choose?
let's look at everything out there and prioritize and figure out where.
Okay, so my question is, the capital, okay, so if we fix everything that we can with our three, that you felt was the most
Yeah,
important.
that we could get,
Yeah, okay, so then we would take off and just take off some of these things of the extended. But there will be some things with the 3 point, whatever it is too, we're still band-aiding. Probably, because we're gonna run,
well, we can't, I mean, any plumbing type problem,
right,
you know. and
so
there's
that
some-
stuff will all
there's some
remain,
things-
that's what I'm
So
saying.
that's on here. The plumbing then would be on your 21 capital through 2025.
Yeah, it's on, I mean, it's on.
It's under building management on the second page, plumbing. You're
we've got about
estimating
6
5, 20, 20, 20.
We got about $65,000 of plumbing work. Is that right? And when did we get notification of our ESSER two funds?
We actually got notification that it was allowable for any construction in September
Of just,
2021.
Last year, 2021.
yep,
ESSER
two.
2. Oh, sorry.
That was ESSER three, right?
Yes.
2021,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
What about ESSER two? When did we
Uh,
get those funds?
I don't remember right off, but it was earlier in 2021 because you were able to, yes. Because it was enough.
Well, you
time
said
to
you
be-
started talking about this in April, so would it be fair to say April of 2021? You guys
So
started,
we didn't get all the money. That wasn't the big.
No, in April, we kind of knew that the money was potentially coming, but we didn't get the okay as far as construction through the Ohio Department of Education until September.
and ESSER two funds was about how much?
Look at these every day, and then you put me on the spot and I forget.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. ESSER two, that was 2.1.
That was 2.1, and ESSER three,
Total. It's 4 something,
4.5, 4.6.
because I know what we were looking at construction wise, it was right under 3.6, but we had other ones, so it was probably.
Some of it went
4.5,
to the
4.2,
learning.
yeah. 4.4, 4.5.
4.4, okay. And
I need to grab my laptop.
no, that's okay. I'm just looking for I'm just looking for roundabouts. And the money, the 3.5 or 3.6 that we have is a combination of ESSER. Is it just ESSER three funds?
ESSER 3.
Now, we started some projects in the million from ESSER two, and we're probably halfway spent on
We have
that.
started, we have spent some of it.
Middle school.
We got that money around in early 2021, right? And we knew that ESSER funds were coming in.
ESSER two
We
didn't.
ESSER
got the
three was
ESSER
coming.
two, ESSER $2 came before the actual ESSER 3's
Right.
notification, but it was the spring of 2021 when we knew we had 3, but we
Okay.
already had 2 and we're planning on the boilers at the middle school and the elementary.
Okay. I'm trying to wrap my mind around.
ESSER two came the
Timeline.
first of 2021.
Yeah,
Then we got notification
in
after I
April.
got on the board that we was going to get ESSER three, but we
Yes.
didn't know what, or what the guidelines were until September
September. We
of
got the,
2021, what we were allowed to use it for.
well, we got the approval that we wanted to use construction.
Good
for
construction,
Right,
yeah.
I would say
Construction hasn't-
construction
yeah.
was the only thing we didn't know, right? You weren't
Correct.
sure if you were
Correct.
able to use the
Correct.
money for that, right?
We
But
got the okay then.
okay, that was when that was.
Is this money dispersed in our funds now? Or do we have to? It's on a reimbursement. Once we decide what we're going to do, then.
Unfortunately, and unfortunately, there's a timeline. If we don't spend it by 2024, they ain't gonna give it to us. That's the scary part.
Well, we're not giving it back. I mean, at the end of, we're not giving it back at the end of the day.
Well, they-
We're gonna pick
Well,
1, 2, 3, or 4. We're not giving it
Unfortunately, We
back.
don't have it.
Yeah.
We have to
Right.
submit for it. But if
We have to
don't-
encumber it, right? Once you encumber it, you can apply for reimbursement.
Correct.
No, once I pay,
Once you pay it.
pay an
You can-
invoice.
So how do you cash flow that? I mean, it's $3.6 million.
Well, but we will be paying, it'll be, right, it's a monthly
Oh, okay,
reimbursement,
so
so, you know,
I'll
all the expense will hit at
And then
once,
you
so,
come back and get reimbursed the next, like they're quick in reimbursing
Yes.
the district.
yes.
Well, they say.
Well, they say they are until they don't appropriate enough, and then we have to wait for legislation to increase the appropriation, yeah,
That's
See, that's
because
the
that's
scary
what's happened
part.
a couple
That's
times.
the scary.
Like with
part.
the stadium project, they build us in pieces and parts as they got things completed. So then that's when we didn't pay it all up front or pay it all at the end.
Yeah, no, I didn't know how
Yeah. How-
what the
How
reimbursement
does
policy
ESSER,
looked like.
does the project have, like, can we say things aren't going to be finished in 2024? Can we submit, I don't think we're allowed to submit a projected invoice.
As of right now, no.
No, okay, that's what I thought. Okay, it has to be spent, and that's the
It has to
hard
be
part.
spent by September 2024, right? You have
Yes.
to have it encumbered though, prior to that. Right?
I don't know if there's even an income, I mean, we have to give them a plan of what
Right.
we want, I mean, but we don't have to actually have like purchase, I mean, the stipulation is you just have to have it paid and seek
Reimbursed.
reimbursement by the end of September 2024.
So your last reimbursement can go in September 2024 for an October
receive an
reimbursement.
I like I would say, I'm gonna take a different avenue, but the transportation grant that we received, that we said that we could buy 4 buses. We have to pay for those up front, then we'll get reimbursed. That's, that's coming on your plate here soon
Yeah.
too.
Well, and for me, knowing how the fiscal budget works at the state level, it's timing, right? Because
Yeah.
it's cash out of the district and, cash back in, so.
Help me understand. I know, I just need to understand it. Why did we get rid of the park? Why did we sell it?
We were looking at the capital outlay improvements that we had there.
I'm
and we-
sorry, can you speak up? Because I can't hear over this stuff.
The capital outlay as far as what we had for building improvements, because we were looking at some major electrical and major boiler repairs at that point. So we then had decided, because we had availability, we chose then to move them over into the primary building. I don't know if you've heard me too.
And when did we sell that building?
That was sold September,
Of 2021, right?
correct?
And we closed that building at what?
That spring would be June
The end of that school year.
of that school year,
Right.
spring of 21.
Now, why? I
Because
can't.
he said because of the expense of
It's hard.
repairing the building, and we had room for the kids. in
Okay,
another
so that
building.
was our worst bill. I mean, that was, well, I'm just trying to,
Well, size-wise.
Size-wise, it wasn't necessarily like our worst building, but as far as what was available to move and help the overall budget fiscally and what was needed for that building, that's why then it was to say, okay, now we have whatever money we had to put there, now we have to disperse it other places for other repairs in our building or in our district. And I say, this plan, as far as any of this stuff, wouldn't have been on the table until that ESSER funds came along.
right. I mean, there's a plan. and then
Which
there-
would have been in April, right? If ESSER funds,
You knew you were
Was
getting them when
April?
we closed it? You knew we knew we were getting ESSER funds when we closed park.
We did at that time, yes. But we had committed at that point to go ahead and move through the procedures as far as closing that building. And we did that action, I don't remember, back in January, December, somewhere prior.
And option 1 and 2, now we have it determined that for option 1 and 2, either the primary over at Trenton or the intermediate here across the street is the buildings that we're looking at to possibly close.
Correct. And looking at those was because of, well, if you look at your potential spending. So those are the buildings that she had looking at putting the most money into them. I initially proposed that you look at keeping the intermediate building just because of size. Because the complaint right now is with the preschool staff, and this is scheduling conflict of when lunch and when preschoolers have to go play and when specials are, and that's what Richard and Shay have to work on as far as when that can work out and be better if things stay the same. But with intermediate, you have a separate cafeteria and a separate gym, and it doesn't become an issue if you need to have kids eating breakfast, but preschoolers need to play. But I mean, that's not a good example, but they have indoor recess in the gym over here. The other buildings don't because they don't have the space.
So the issue is the preschool, basically. Being where they were moved space-wise. The issue is we have room at the high school. I mean, there's plenty of room at the high school. We saw that. But Trenton is packed. So the issue really is where the location of the preschool is.
You have open building or open rooms in every building except for the primary building right now.
Right.
And before you
So
had
there's
open
quite a bit at
buildings-
the high school. I mean,
Yes,
I thought like there was quite a bit.
there's like at least four open rooms right now currently.
I did, they are, it's congested over time, it is,
It's, yeah.
they're in like sardines.
It almost to me is a fire hazard. Looking around over there. It's packed. Right, yeah,
That's
right,
all the
it's just
The
at
baskets.
no fault of the kids or the staff, it's just, it's packed.
I would voice my concern, my only concern with Trenton Avenue is the complaint that some of the teachers said, well, the other buildings, the kids have, there's a bathroom at the intermediate on every floor. So that the teachers complained there wasn't enough, the kids are little and they have to go, and the bathrooms, if you're a first grader, you're on the top floor of Trenton Avenue, you have to go down 3 floors to the basement to go to the bathroom. So they were complaining, some teachers said there's too many steps at the intermediate or the, intermediate one, but there's a bathroom on every floor. So I'm trying to like weigh what the little kid, the first graders are going 3 floors when they got to pee. And they're hurrying when they're doing that, so steps aren't an issue for going to pee when you're usually hurrying to do that, where you're, at least at the intermediate, we have more bathroom space. That's what I was thinking. If you're going to close a building, that was my biggest concern. I'm trying to listen to bathrooms and then trying to weigh the situation of the 2 buildings.
But prior to that, kindergarten would have been located where preschool is now, where that bathroom was right there. So the
No,
little
I'm talking
kids.
first grade's always been,
On the second floor? Did they second?
Keegan's been on, he was on the 3rd floor when
Well, it
he
used to
went.
be, remember, it used to be a
I
K
can't
to 3
even remember. I can't
building.
even remember. Yeah,
I mean, you had K to 3 there.
Right.
Yeah.
and there's
So-
no bathroom on the second floor?
No,
No.
bathrooms are all in the basement. And when Keegan went there, that's been quite a while ago. That was before they still had park and everything. He was first grade, he was upstairs. 3rd floor.
The other concern, yeah,
So I mean,
but
Right, so it's the same.
And
right, they had to walk.
I think outdoor steps are maybe a little different than being indoor and using those maybe too.
but before you guys were when we were on the board last time and Northside was still here with preschool, you probably remember that the preschoolers walked across the street and went to the intermediate for lunch. So rain, sleet, snow, whatever, they went and ate. So it was still something that was accessible to them at that point in time. But as far as, the steps and things, as far as I've talked with Mrs. DiDonato regarding how she dismisses or how she brings kids in. I mean, what works now doesn't have to work in the future, she said. You know, she could work out different areas, like if, instead of coming out dismissal the front doors and down the steps, you could come out on the side doors and down the ramp and down the sidewalk instead of down the straight steps. So that's not an issue there. Currently, cars are getting dropped off at the gym door, and they're greeted by Mrs. Davis, and they go into either eat or they go into the gym and sit when they first arrive. So that wouldn't really change. As far as dismissal, maybe she brings them in off of like an alley there. I don't know if that street is 4th Street or if that's just an alley, and bringing them down this direction and then down the hill instead of up or parking out front here and having kids walk across the street. So that's what they're currently doing. As far as car pickups are across the street, but now maybe you could do it up there, up the hill instead. And drop-offs are
Up this side hill?
up the side hill, and drop-offs are up the side hill.
That's where we drop them off. That's where we used to drop the kids. You still do that? Drop the kids
Yes.
off. And they go in the gym door or the cafeteria doors or whatever that is. Not gym doors. I think it's cafeteria. doors.
Yeah,
They
it's
go
right in
that way
that,
to gym,
yeah.
or that way to cafeteria.
Is this facility behind us, the gym, it used to, it had or can have a working kitchen?
It functions or stuff in there. There's, you know, so.
As of right now,
So,
I mean,
but
The
I-
dishwasher can pull out.
Michelle, well, after visiting the building, Michelle brought up a point to me, and I don't want to steal this from her, as adding another option. And just, I'll let her discuss her point to you. I don't want to steal it from her, but after hearing her and thinking about it, I do like the idea.
well, as I said before, I think the issue is preschool. I think that we have to find a better spot for preschool. I didn't know if this building, part of this building, this back area, and I don't
You
know
mean
in
this
the gym.
building here?
Yes, if preschool could be in this building and use that gym.
I know that they are very.
They are, and I think that stops them from intermingling with the older kids. I don't know.
It does in school settings. Yeah, because
Right.
they have to have a separate play space. They
Right.
have, they,
And you have the play area here.
yes.
and
I
the
mean, you
gym
have them,
there.
you have them separate drop-off times, okay, of course. There's no school on Friday. You have the preschool, you fix this into classrooms right here at this facility, behind the door. You connect the gym, and I noticed the door out here where you've gone right into the facility next door. You have the bathrooms in this building, correct? You have a kitchen area, you have a playroom area.
I didn't know if meals could be delivered like they were at preschool from one of the other buildings. Weren't they brought over by the cafeteria? So, right.
The question is, as far as do you have enough space for 5 classrooms, you have to have so much per square footage per kid. And right now, you might be able to squeak 2 classrooms out of this area.
Plus, we have this whole backspace, right?
Then we got to build something to move all the storage that's back here someplace else. And then you go down the basement, and that's basically used for everything for maintenance right now. That's their maintenance hub.
But with the open classrooms, are we able to find an open classroom to store that kind of stuff in?
I'm sure we could. I just don't know the right spot.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say the intervention stuff
Right.
are
It's
good.
personnel stuff, it's special ed stuff, it's payroll stuff.
That has to stay here. I mean, that's behind
This
this
is all
wall.
payroll
That's,
back here.
yes. And their personnel files and student records are behind us locked up.
You need to walk back there and see.
7 years of checks and license.
I know, there's a lot.
But-
There's a lot
How
of
many
person-
years do you have to keep that stuff?
7. for
7 for
payroll.
accounting, but
Certain
other
things-
stuff is like lifetime.
Personnel files are forever.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Student
lifetime.
records are forever.
Personnel
So
files
you
are
could go
forever.
back there and get your student file. Some-
Yeah.
And we talk about, I know it's
Don't get
expensive.
them out.
It's expensive to do the digital format and paying a company that comes in and puts everything on digital format. That would be the time, if we said, oh, we're gonna hire a summer help person to do all those things, it would be forever running it through a copier machine to scan to wherever we would store it in digital format. Yeah. Yeah, hiring a company to come in and putting in digital format is expensive, but I mean, when you're existing as a district for how many years, and you're gonna go for how many more years, you're gonna have, if you're either gonna go digital, or you're gonna find another space to put your personnel files and your student files.
Do we,
Go digital?
Yeah, I mean, I don't
Prepare,
think it's-
respond. Yeah, prepare, respond,
Right.
for coronavirus.
do we own behind the post office, or did we rent that out? We rented that when the board office was there.
There's what, 2 lots or 1 lot directly behind our building that's for sale. I think they're not long and narrow, so we have 1. I mean,
Oh, really? Back this way?
it's in between the 2 houses there. They just tore it down.
But I mean, being storage, if you needed storage, I mean, you could always build something. couldn't you?
Yeah, we'd have to find a place where we would put it.
So
Just some of the stuff from access, they're using it. on a daily basis.
So you guys, you get into these files every day. You need them, so they have to be
I don't
close.
necessarily do, but I know that, the special
Okay,
ed does.
so that the special ed stuff has to be somewhere located
Yes.
somewhere close, but like all this other stuff can go
Where,
in other places.
As long as it's.
It's like my
secure.
closet at home. I can shove
Don't know.
it. Like, don't open
But
it.
everyone with our
Pull out.
preschool director, or secretary, everyone is housed here.
Right.
I mean,
the preschool director is housed here, yes.
or secretary, like, so who's our director, preschool director?
Joe,
Joe. Now, what is, she's special ed, or special ed? or
Jody,
this is a problem? Okay.
Tammy,
Or, no, Tammy's her secretary,
yeah.
correct?
Tammy's technically curriculum secretary, special ed secretary, preschool secretary. She's got multiple things in there, but she's primarily does special ed and does some preschool. I don't think, Jody said she's never used her as her curriculum secretary.
Jody does it. for you.
I mean, is she supposed to be over at Trent with the preschoolers?
You have to have, no,
What do you have to have
you
there?
you have to have an administrator on site. So it's be like the ESC has preschools all over and at other districts. We just house our own. And their director is at the Education Service Center up in New Philly. And they have site supervisors or they have administrators in charge. So that's what Shay is at the primary building.
But doesn't Jody's qualification make her have to be there a percentage of the time?
No. You just have to have a director, you have to have a person in charge, administrator in charge. So no, just like I explained, the ESC has someone who's a director for all the ESC preschools, and they might have 15 of them. They're not at all 15 every day, all day. So they have a director and they have a person in charge. So the goal is for Shay to become that, get her Oprah credentials, that she, if she has the qualifications, then to be the director also. And if you did an option as far as moving the preschool and like the option 3 or 4 that I gave the last time, as far as flipping people around, it's like you're looking at preschool. If preschool's the problem, if you make preschool kindergarten a building, then Shay could be your preschool director there. And then you're still keeping the Trenton Avenue building, and you're still keeping the intermediate building.
Then at Eastport, then you have those built rooms that have the bathrooms in. it. So you would just like do the flip flop.
Yes. That's why, because the restrooms were concerned, that's why the flip flop was presented.
Why wasn't that considered when you shut down the school? I mean, in my mind, I just keep thinking, were we short-sighted on it and we just didn't think the process through? Or so now we're gonna do it all over again? That's what I'm asking. Just what I'm saying, like, most of these options have, regardless, preschool's going to Eastport. And I've heard over and over again because of room. But we've already disrupted it once and put them all over at Trenton, and now we're gonna flip it and take them all over there. So you can understand like my hesitation, because I just want to make sure whatever we do, we're thinking far enough ahead, which is my question. You're like, how long do these chillers last? You know, I don't want to Band-Aid anything. I want to make a good decision that's in the best interest of the district. But we literally just shut down Park Avenue School, put them at Trenton, and now we're going to move them from Trenton back over to move them to Eastport because there's just no room for them. They can't do lunch and then have playtime because there's all these rules that go with preschool. And so I'm a little bit hesitant, because are we thinking about everything we need to be thinking about? Or are we going to put ourselves in a position again that we're going to move these and then all of a sudden we've got issues? Yeah, I know. I was part of that. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Right.
That Jim. So we're not competing on the same basis. But Jim and
So you can't make gym at the primary building on Fridays and get the same solution, or?
It's almost like preschool needs to be its own entity.
It's our feeder program. We have to have preschool. We gotta feed our kids into Claymont schools.
I've got a great question. What's our end goal, I guess?
I mean, for the district, I mean, so Claymont,
Are
just
we
in the
wanting
building by
to-
itself.
Are we wanting to, I know we're entertaining, keep everything, pour all this money into keeping the book we have. Where does that take us in 5, 10, 15 years? I'm hoping wanting to still grow. Where do you see that? Or are we just going to be content with what we have? Wanting to go on one campus at some point, what does that look like, and how do we get there? That's where I'm at with. I think that's been the process. You can see it, like, if you're closing this one down and shuffling kids and you're disrupting them, they're going to adjust, and you're going to now look at this one, possibly that one. That's telling everybody we're looking to do something. It's going to be out here, we're over here.
I totally agree with you. I mean, when we built that new high school, I personally do not like where they're located, but it's over and done. It's been there 20+ years. Okay. But we should have probably did a campus if that's what our goal was then. I mean, or where the water park was. I mean, to me, down where the water park was would have been ideal for to have the whole campus, your stadium, everything's in town, it's there. But I mean, I agree. We're just bouncing, just like, we're talking about the preschool. Went from North Side, the park, the Trent. Now where they? We're just band-aiding the problem.
I would say that when you went to the bond issue, then the board probably at that point in time was having difficulty. Well, I know they were having difficulty selecting a site, but also they probably weren't going to get the votes to be able to do a campus because of well, we want to keep some in-town schools and things like that. I know when I was at Frontier Local, they had a school that they closed in 2012 that only had 40 kids in it. But 20 years ago, when they built their 2 new buildings at the elementaries and added on to their high school, they said, yeah, we'll keep that building out there. And then 15 years later, they had to close it because they didn't have enough kids. But they said, we won't pass this. So they said, okay, we won't build a campus. We'll build 2 elementaries and add on. And that's why they did that. I know that specifically from there. I have to figure same conversation probably happened here.
And that happened with Rush. I mean, I went to, I personally went to kindergarten first out of Rush, and then everyone got shipped into town for school. I mean, that's one of our buildings that was in our district.
I keep forgetting that Rush. When did that close? That closed when you were in school?
Well, when I was in school, but I
About mid-90s, I think.
what year?
I think I agree with Steve. We need to have an end goal in kind of what Cindy said. We're kind of bouncing, I think, I can't speak, completely, but I think when the decision was made to close park because of astronomical expenses for, there and to move, I don't think we realized we was going to get $4.5 million of ESSER funds. We didn't know that. So that decision had already been made. So now we're given this pot of money, which we probably won't get any more pots of money. So we need to use it wisely and make a decision based on what's going to benefit us. Like you said, 10 years down the line, instead of putting a Band-Aid here, and then turn around faced with the same dilemma again. We're not going to be handed $4 million again.
I agree. And like I said, we're not giving it back. It's just,
And so
what
we
if we
need to,
didn't have the ESSER funds? We closed down the park. We still have the problems that we have.
right.
You know what I'm saying? Like we closing park didn't solve anything for us outside of the financial part. Well, that's what I'm saying. You're talking whatever you're, and we move them over there and we have an issue of over too many kids. That's what I'm saying. It didn't solve.
No.
All it did
Right.
was create another problem. Whereas we saved $150,000. I'm just speculating because I looked at the other operating costs for the other buildings. We saved $150,000 and created $150,000 headache. But I agree. We're not giving the ESSER funds back. I'm with you 100%
Yeah, and we just
on
need to
that.
figure out what we think long-term is going to be the issue. And hopefully we're making a move and we're going to be able to live with it.
Yeah. Like when we talk going back and forth between Eastport or not Eastport, I'm sorry, the Trenton and Intermediate. I was on the board the last time that the village made us spend, $7,000 to put these gates in at either end because we couldn't keep it, we couldn't close it off all day.
Right.
Right. So now we have to shut the gates and you can only do it during lunch, right? You can't.
No,
go-
they actually had Helen.
Are they being more?
Well, we only
flexible?
close them at lunch, but
Right.
Helen Borland told me that she said we can close them in the morning when we want to, and actually in the springtime they're used. yeah, they're longer because they will come outside at,
Well, that's my
Nine.
concern, right?
Yeah.
If I leave this building and I've got kids and we got this, which that playground's great and the equipment's fantastic, but it's not that big. So if the kids can't play in the street, we can't shut the street down and let the kids have a recess, regardless of it having a gym and a cafeteria. And I'm not worried about the steps either. I took my nephew over there with his backpack on and he's like, I don't know, second grade, and he went up and down the steps with no problem. I'm not worried about the steps. I'm more worried about their outside time there, you know, and I understand Trenton too, you know, it's.
Where, like, if you had something of that age, like,
Yeah, there's no growth potential at any of those locations as far as adding on to them.
if you're looking at the Eastport, it's far as the adding, I mean, I hear you saying preschool's the problem, but you have 5 preschool classrooms currently. And you have, say, 6, right now, if you had 6 kindergarten or 6 second and 6 third grades, there's enough, as I count, 6 class, enough for, if you just move preschool, there's enough for second and third grade there. And that's not including what's in the new edition that I can't really see on that copy, because I know that there's some other classrooms in there too. There are, because there's, Beth helped me on that one. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 classrooms
Are you
plus
looking at the
1, 2,
Eastport
3,
Avenue
4.
Well, there's,
And then this is the
There's-
library.
there's 3.
Three
This is the
classrooms.
library right here.
This is in art,
That's art, yes.
and there's
There's
classrooms
1,
here.
2, 3, 4.
So there's spaces there.
Yes.
So I didn't count all the classroom spaces. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 extra classrooms that I hadn't accounted for. One of them would be used for art and music.
And you're talking if you would expand Eastport.
If you'd expanded Eastport
You
with the
could
play
house
area,
preschool through first grade easily there with room for expansion.
or not move kindergarten and first, and just keep second, third there and move the preschool only,
Move the preschool only to where?
the Eastport.
With second and third?
Yeah,
Are you able to do that with our guidelines with that age group?
mhm. They just can't go to playtime together, and they have to have their separate lunch.
You still have, yeah, you can get one kid through one group. Gym.
Yeah, but you would have the indoor play area.
oh, if you would have.
If you would
Oh.
expand Eastport, and put
Oh,
the-
expand Eastport and move preschool to Eastport.
You'd have your indoor play area.
and you're saying then keep Trenton out, you keep all buildings open, is that?
Yeah, you'd keep everybody the same.
You-
But that goes back to,
Where do we get the money to do the repairs if we keep all the buildings open
Yeah,
and
you
use the money for expansion? I thought maybe you had a pot of money somewhere you weren't sharing with us.
no, I don't. That would be what we'd have to prioritize, what we have available for us. I mean, if you took a look at this building and displaced the central office, wherever we would move to, you're still spending a lot of money here renovating this building to hook it to the gym over there.
These
But
buildings
would
are
we
both
even
$1
have to
million.
hook it to the gym? So we just leave it like it is and just walk to the gym?
For preschool, I wouldn't.
I mean, is there a cut across back here somewhere?
No.
You have to go this way, out around.
Mhm.
I wouldn't want the preschoolers having to be.
I mean, there's a door, there's a door right here that you could, I don't know what it would cost to connect from here to there.
We'd have, if that's the direction you want to go, we'd have to go back to diversified and take a look at that.
Well, I don't think it would
They're
hurt.
doing all our engineering work. Who is going to do, or do we contract that out?
I mean, we're going to have. We can't just designate them as, open it up for bids, interviewing companies.
What's that?
Federal procurement, we have to follow the guidelines. So
We just can't say, oh, we want this done. I mean, the stuff that's been done right now is very, high level. They put the square footage dollars, which are tend to be on high, on the high side. In calculating the numbers. And they've done walkthroughs and looked at, I knew that wrong. That what we that. Fraction more than getting the bid off.
But yeah, we'd have to have the drawing kind of idea of what we want before. That's when we worked with Diversified before. And so they did the stadium drawings and then we went through everybody.
But they could just come down and like look around in this building. I mean, is that what they've been doing? Yeah.
They'd have to get paid.
What's the total amount of ESSER that we have as a breakdown
for the project or overall,
overall?
ESER 3, like
4.5,
4.5,
right, I got that, but I mean, we're adding that with ESSER 2, or is that
not for construction.
not for construction?
And not all of that can be construction because some of it went out
1
for,
million.
20% was for
Learning loss.
Okay.
So we hired we paid substitutes for permanent subs at a higher rate. We've done tutoring with incentives to get tutors. Curriculum, we're working on curriculum, Chromebooks. Hired extra aides at the elementary and the primary building from the ESC. So that all came from that money.
So why are we using all the money or a lot of the money on projects instead of the learning loss and that sort of thing? Are we only using the minimal amount on learning loss that we have to use?
That was the original intent as far as what we had discussed previously, is what we were using, what we had to do for that, because the discussion went to what can we do to prepare for coronavirus, and how could we use it for boilers and chillers that were becoming outdated. And the conversation then went to, well, what if we looked at some other options as far as expanding a building for the future? So that's where
And looking at staff wise then too, we didn't want to be put to a position that if we hired more staff, then it would be sustainable past a couple of years.
Right, but for the time being right now, do we need that staff because of COVID, because of the gaps in learning? Do we,
That's what we've done.
but,
After speaking to some of the teachers, that's what was suggested, so that's what.
but how is that going right now? Put on what?
as far as the extent of the tutoring,
Just everything in general. Are we getting caught up from how far we've been behind as far as the learning loss?
well, our data from the map that we had from fall to now, we have a couple grade levels that didn't meet benchmark, but everybody else had really met benchmark between the fall and to now. So when you're looking at that national data and comparison where they should be, majority of our kids at grade levels are at that target. So there's just a couple of them that, and I don't have them in front of me, but there's a couple grade levels that aren't at a math or an ELA.
You
But
don't have the grade levels, but
I have it, but as far as right off the top of my head, I don't have that. So the data that we have from fall to now, the learning loss and the targets where the kids are as a whole, they're right where they should be. So to single out that all of our kids are behind, I can't do that by looking at the data.
Now, we've had, right now, we're looking at new ELA curriculum, and so we've had, I think today was like our third curriculum meeting.
I know, I feel bad.
I'm
I
learning a lot.
haven't been able
Thank
to
you,
make
Jody
those.
Miles. Yeah, so, yeah, but I'll tell you what Jody's, at least for the ELA, we're moving to math in 3 weeks, she told me, where she's filling my schedule, but we're gonna make it work. So she's got some really good, solid options. So like that it's paper pen, it's online, it's
I'm
you know,
sorry.
everything.
I'm sorry.
No, you're
Yeah.
fine.
Can you have me leaving at 8:20? Or I gotta go to
Work.
change
Go to work.
and be at work. so.
His electric bill.
On the road.
Hey, you want me to leave this? I appreciate this. or-
You could,
But
you
you want me to leave
me,
it right now?
you could take it and stuff what you
The
want in
rest of
there.
it in there?
If-
Okay.
Or if you don't want it,
No, I appreciate it. and I was gonna thank you in the open session at our
okay.
meeting on Monday. along with you. But,
Have
See
fun.
ya, Aaron.
See ya,
fun.
Aaron.
yeah.
You're saying supporting that end goal. Correct me if I'm wrong, and staff, Joey, going along with that. Supporting them, letting them, be who they are. With our 5-year forecast, always trying to stay where it needs. That budgeting that money, allow her to do it. And that money should be there.
Well, I know the,
Give us the curriculum and the direction
Yeah.
we want to go without dumping all this here now, is what I'm thinking. We do it as we're budgeting as we're going, trying to get where we need to go.
in curriculum you buy for 7 years, 7,
Right.
8 years. At ELA, I think 7 years, and the math is 8 years, she told me, and that's with continuous updates. So what we're investing now is going to benefit. You're gonna see that grade span, you're gonna see that. And a lot of the curriculum, which I thought was kind of cool too, she's trying to bridge that gap, a lot of it's like K-12, like it starts here and then it goes to 5th grade, and then 6th grade it picks up, but it's like the same company with the same design. And I think it's pretty cool what I saw today was really great. So
And we're trying to get them on a schedule,
mhm.
because like right now, everything is needed. So if
Yeah.
we get one a year or
Right.
something like that, that we can get it so it can be more affordable
Right.
as time goes on.
So in 7 years, we have to get a new ELA, but we still have another year of math. So you budget for the
Right.
next year, you're gonna get the math.
Exactly.
So
So the ESSER fund, some of that lost learning, we can use that ESSER funds to help us with that curriculum.
Mm.
And I apologize, Cindy, I have not been able to make any of them. There's.
that's
This is a
okay.
bad month
No,
for me,
no,
but
it's okay.
I
Unless
wanna
I have to
get
put them in my
caught up.
calendar and put reminders, and I told her, I said,
And
y'all
holidays
work
have
for
like
me.
a digital
You take care
component,
of it.
correct?
Yeah, digital,
So-
like today
so
was
it's-
pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's digital, it's paper, it's,
So if we have to go to remote, there's at least.
Yeah, that's
that
where she's
part of it
going.
That goes right with, so.
Mhm.
And when I speak about learning loss, I'm not necessarily meaning curriculum. I think you understood that. I meant
Yeah,
like
yeah.
more like staffing.
My thing, and I might be speaking out of term here, but being an employer for a long period of time, it's hard we have X amount of money for learning, or we can consider it learning loss, and we bring in all this extra staff. Employees get very upset when it has to end and you have to pull it away. So it's kind of like, I'll use it, in my you have a janitor and you gave him an extra helper for the last 6 months, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, the ESSER funds are gone, so we have to get rid of, it creates,
It's a culture kill.
yeah, and so we need to stick with, yeah, we brought in some, but if you put in a lot of staffing, it makes it very difficult to remove, and for the staff that you currently have to adjust to the loss of, and sometimes it's better to change other things and make life easier for them than to add a helper, because sometimes they get so used to it, and then you have to say, I'm going to take it away. Then you've recreated another problem. And it's very difficult right now to find employees. And then you're also looking at that employee that you're getting ready to hire, and you're saying, you're only here for a year. So that's where your problem lies with that. And I think we need to be more creative in our learning loss. We did, like Cindy, we're getting new curriculum, we're getting new technology and things like that, because I think staffing wise, if you keep adding a whole lot of people, when you pull them away, it's really hard it's hard for people to adjust.
But I don't think, I don't necessarily, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I do think, like, if you hire people in smaller amounts, there'll be people that retire, and there'll be those kinds of things that will create openings also. I'm not saying that there's gonna be 100 people that retire, of course, but yeah.
Currently, right now, I was at a meeting recently, and they said that there are about 5,000 educators retiring every year. 2,500 new educators are coming out of college, which is creating a shortage, in which we're already at every district I was in Columbus today, and they have a shortage on subs, and whether it was in the western part of the state, southern part of the state, they don't have subs. And we're now banking on the idea that we can allow high school graduates come in and take over a classroom, and the legislators for next year are thinking, yes, that's even a possibility for us to do. With our last BLT, and when we're looking at our numbers, is the data that we have, we're talking about what we need to do to raise achievement, to raise growth within our core instruction. No matter if it's just with one kid in a classroom or 25 kids in a classroom, but how can I better my adult implementations as far as my strategies to be better, to be able to reach these kids, to be able to reach their goals. And based off that map data, a lot of the grade level are doing that. So for example, third grade, I don't have the numbers, but maybe third grade exceeded in one area, but was below in another area. But that tells me that their core instruction is getting stronger. Whether they have 22 kids in the classroom or 25 kids in the classroom, but they're changing what they need to do instructionally. And Mrs. Miles said at our last DLT last week, she said, I feel like a proud parent because of the conversations we're having about how we can change our teaching styles. And where were we, she said, where we were years ago, and we were meeting report cards, to where we are today, where we're struggling. Granted, the tests have changed. They've raised the bar and the expectations, but she said, we were meeting those years ago, and we had that strong curriculum component coming. And how did we lose it? She didn't know, but she said she feels that that's coming back.
When I know, sitting in on the curriculum meetings, I know that one of the focuses is for those kids, because you have a classroom full of 8th graders, and you have various levels of skill and ability to read and write. And the programs, at least what I've seen, have the flexibility for the teacher to narrow it down. So if I've got an 8th grader who really is at 6th grade work, I'm able to assign the level of work to help that kid achieve, because once you start achieving, you gain confidence. Once you gain confidence, and you go to the next level. So I think the
first place never told you, like, you don't get movement by this time. This is probably
whoever it is, that you're starting, it's about 6 months to design. And then about bid, so going out to bid, so you're looking, I think, the time that kind of work on construction, you know, when some of that can be done. Talk to them about esports. There's work that could be done outside, you know, but that, well. But,
Answer, huh?
I mean, no, I think, it needs to be.
Within a
It
couple
can't be
months,
6
probably.
months from now.
Yeah, within a couple months, I would say.
I think Cindy
I didn't hear what I didn't hear.
mentioned something there. I'm just thinking down the road, my mind's going that way. So let's just say you went eastward.
Yeah.
The engineering process of that, what does that have to look like if you want to come back there in 10 years, 15 years, and go out and up? What do they have to do? They have to be
Well, I think
ready
we
to
want to
allow
give
that.
them as
So
much
you gotta
of a
plan for
vision
that.
now. I mean, we want to give them a vision now of, you know, this might be
That's
step
possible.
one of, you know, a two-part phase that, you know, eventually
Yeah,
we're
'cause
going to have
I've been entertaining
pre-K
myself.
through,
Share, you know, pre-K through 6 there.
yeah, which, whatever that is.
Because like, again, 21 years, high school out there, revenue coming in, it's not been good. Track record shows it's minimal. We may not see anything. I don't know if it's faster than that state.
Definitely,
And
you know,
we're
it's a
becoming
space
an-
we're not utilizing.
And we're becoming an older community.
Right. We-
So what's happening is the families like my family, Cindy's family, your families, you're not leaving the district for the new families aren't coming in. Your family's leaving the area because we don't have the job opportunity. So the population, if you look at the census population in our district, you know, some people say, oh, it's loss of kids leaving the district. No, it's also loss of, we're becoming a different age community.
The city of Urixville is in jeopardy of losing its city status because of its census data.
Right, because we're not bringing in, we're not growing. And I don't, when you look at the community and I'm looking at, it's wonderful for my business.
Yeah, older generation.
You know, well, I'm looking at
Now
it,
that's
it's great.
strategy and foresight.
It's not, but when you're looking at a school district, you're not seeing the younger population moving into the area. And you just look at your own children, they're going away to college and they're not coming back to the area. And, you know, unfortunately, that's the problem. So we need to, as a board, we need to look at that progression too, because it's not so much. We have to look at what our future lies, and that's what's happening.
And you want your buildings to be attractive looking for the guy that's
So
shopping
that, so
around.
we can get the people
Right.
into the area, but the odds are, we just don't have, you know, if you go into the technology field, we don't have a lot of jobs here to offer somebody that just spent 6 years in college in technology. So,
Yeah, when Mr. Cottrell brought up about the high school and going for one building campus at that point in time, I would go back to Frontier. And they were saying, well, we should have just built one campus. That's what they were saying 20 years later. But the guys that were on the board at that point in time that were talking with me said it wasn't going to pass, but they forgot 20 years ago, they were adamantly opposed to this.
Yeah.
We should have done this. Well, you know, you were the one who was standing up at a board meeting complaining that we were considered.
Well, in hindsight, it was 2020, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you'd have
exactly.
known then what you know now, and just about every aspect of your life, just different decisions would be made.
I remember that my daughter was first graduating class at the new high school. So I remember when that bond, all that stuff was happening. So
Yeah.
your kids were too.
So what would you like for the future here? As far as, do you want us to contact Diversified and have them talk about this building? And we look at finding some place to displace our offices here and all the equipment that we have here in storage to someplace else? I mean, we could look at that route. Honestly,
Is there room for you guys to stay here on that side?
without knowing as far as what they could look at as far as renovating and making that, I won't answer that
I
question.
mean, like this room is used now for the district. Come here.
Yeah, that's why.
Kind of made it to, that's why we did this. So we've got our sort of space here, with a lot of good, a lot of different.
We had DLT here, we got
Yeah,
curriculum meetings
if you need
here.
a space like this wherever, somewhere.
admin
Do we
meetings
have a
here.
space like this that can be used at at the high school, any other buildings?
But we need multiple spaces like that, but no, not.
You got
The
it.
auditorium at the high school.
The
Because
unfortunate thing, when you're having meetings, some of the meetings need to be, you don't want earshot of students.
No, that was,
There.
when we ran our DLTs at the high school a couple years ago, that was, kids were walking through our meeting to get in Chromebooks and things like that. It wasn't a staff meeting type of environment.
in some of these offices, like, I don't know, like Nino, those offices back there, is there potential they can be moved out? I don't know, like, does Brandy need to be here? Nino need to be here? Is it,
Nino needs to be here because of files.
Yes.
okay, so he is,
Special education stuff, and like, he's always kind of moved around wherever the files are, because that's a big thing.
wherever those are at.
If we look at, if Brandy would just become the social worker for the primary building and the elementary building, and we took off the attendance piece that she does and the McKinney-Vento and reassigned that to an administrator, there's one office, so that's probably a 10 by 10. If that,
I don't, who else has offices there?
Nino, Tammy, Heather. We have a maintenance office that has all the software for our heating and cooling systems. We have transportation, food service. We have 3 tech offices. And then we have the restroom area.
Do the tech offices need to be here, or would they be more apt to be at the high school in those places more often?
I mean, they're in all of them, so it's just, that's kind of where we put all of our stuff on one location. Things like that, I would find, so that's the art, and you have to put that stuff, you know, sets and all of those things. They- So. We've given up space. High school to give up space. So they're using that, you know, I think long term, we would want whatever preschool,
Right.
whatever the complex is, have to be this big, house, this kind of thing. What would that look like?
Yeah. I just don't want to be the guy. Why didn't you think of this?
Well, or
We're
you
trying
don't want to block
They-
off something, yeah, you want to say, don't do something that we couldn't potentially expand, expand.
Right,
later.
right, like you have to, say, what's the end all that you're looking for?
Right.
And this would be a phase one of a multi.
And we did look at an option as far as putting a gym on at Eastport. But that was over $1 million in site work. So that far exceeded the budget. And that was
Which would
flipping
be
the
nice.
playground from one side to the other side. And with adding classrooms.
That could be a multi-phase. That would be a
Yes.
wonderful idea.
Well, in this design, it was that we had a little bit of space to put a gym on with a couple, was after one of those entrances or exits on the 12th Street side, wasn't it? Yeah.
Right.
Like we were saying, where they get to come in. Double door that could eventually
Attach it.
onto it.
Future.
Not limiting ourselves.
You don't need something the size of the field house for a gym. I mean, because, when Park School was K through 4, they had the cafeteria / gym in that one little area. It was probably a 20 by 20 room. And they play kickball and dodgeball and everything in there. But, the field house is a metal building. The Perry Reese Center out at Highland is a metal building. So those aren't, they're the cost for the field house by doing cement versus doing block versus what we did was why we did what we did, because it was cheaper, less expensive, I should say. It wasn't cheaper, less expensive. So that would be something as far as down the road, if that's something you're considering is for, okay, you have space to put a gym on, then yes, that would be a less expensive way to put an extra gym on, plus maybe looking at building up on classrooms.
The operating cost of different buildings, then absolutely. Cost of having some good support. Going. Trying to, we have never had a list here. And I think so many changes, but we've never been able to, it's like I list all the stuff and it may be $4 million of things that we have 400,000. So, okay, what do we do? So it just seems like constantly, never to the point.
Right.
So I think that was kind of the thought process. Have less buildings. Less buildings, so going forward,
Cut down on the expense. And
the expense, and then be able to do some of the
then you'd also have the operating cost of that building.
operating.
And
save money,
personnel.
and that helps with.
We would save, which we have some administration that's retiring anyway, we would save at least one administration position, which would,
If you ultimately close the building, and you wouldn't have a need for a principal.
you wouldn't have to hire somebody else.
Maybe, maybe a couple janitors, maybe cooks. Cooks, they would probably move. So. But thinking that, okay, instead of having one 6-hour, 7-hour cook, we'd have 2 7-hour cooks over here, plus whatever help that they had because of the number of students. So, your personnel costs, you're really saving in the administration and the secretary costs, because you're still going to have at least 2.5 janitors or something over here, because you're going to have more classrooms to clean. Right now, they don't clean 3 or 4 classrooms across the street, for example. They don't clean 4 or 5 classrooms at the high school on a daily basis.
You're not really going to lose any OPSI staff. You're looking at more administrative staff, cut back on the administrative staffing, which that's where most of your cost is anyway, it's saving.
be.
And wouldn't be really nobody losing a job.
Richard said he's planning on retiring in 2024. You know, I don't know when Mrs. DiDonato plans on retiring, but you know, I know she's pretty much eligible too. But that's where, you know, when they, if you, that's why 2024 was looked at as a date, because you're not displacing a administrator either, you're absorbing those costs. And if we're going to move on, if I go to executive session for employment and discipline.
So, yeah, I'll make a motion, we go to executive session for employment and discipline.
You stay here. Yep, okay, thank you. I love your sweater, Jody. That's really good. I love your sweater.
Same.
Motion.
Cindy made a motion.
I made it.
Mrs. Host,
Yes.
Mr. Miles,
Yes.
Mrs. Grant.
Thank, yes,
and
thanks, Beth,
Mrs.
for
Wolf.
Yes.
postponing yourself.
8:48.
Why we have to read them.
I don't know.
Let me put mine on.
Board of Education back in session. Time 9:52. Adjourn, please.
Second it.
Time. Next meeting, February 14th, 6 p.m. Thank you.
Now,